That's just their normal way.
So it must have been there the whole time and I didn't see it.
Yeah, no,
They just put it there about 6 months ago.
I know, so you've been back here since then.
It's coffee glass bunch. Right over ready to go.
Have respect for your enemies, boy.
Thank everybody.
Time you got put in your place.
Thank you. We this morning, we are now into the afternoon session. Well, of course, if you're just joining us online, we are going through and giving an indication at this point of where we think things will sit. And then we'll have a look at the numbers at the end, see if we're happy with that, and then go through and make formal resolutions in terms of each item. But up next.
Up next is the supercars. So this was grant out of the tourism reserves to support supercars coming to Central Otago. What you can see from the data we've got from our community, pretty strong option C, so 36% that do not support funding this. It is Officer's thought at this point in time, given that we have not received a formal offer or formal contract, that it is withdrawn from the LTP consideration at this point. That just makes it a bit cleaner and easier on Monday for the audit.
Thank you, and recognising that we do have some legal requirements for audit. I think we've certainly heard the views from the public as part of this process, but we've not heard directly from supercars. Though of course I'm sure that we're aware of the scuttlebutt. And if there were to be a formal offer in the future, we could consider the use of reserves, which would have no rating impact. However, on the basis of no offer, there's no decision required for the long-term plan 2025 to 34, and therefore the item is withdrawn.
I've got a question.
Yep.
Did we get a submission from Supercars?
Good question. No.
I don't remember seeing one.
No.
So we said we'll go and talk to our community to see if they've got an appetite for it. They've said to us clearly we don't, which for me is enough and almost enough to say, well, I get it. But Supercars didn't even. Would have thought someone would have made sure they knew about the process and would have been in their boots and all. So just to me, that just backs up why we're saying it's not on the table.
We're saying we are not making a decision about it, and perhaps they might like to note that for future.
Yeah.
Any future proposals for councils in New Zealand? I'd like to hear directly.
And I do have something I want to add is that I know that we've probably talked quite a bit about these tourism reserves that we've got, and I just wondered if there'd be an appetite to ask Ents and his team to bring a paper to this table about possibilities of what we could potentially use those reserves for.
Yep, that's a great idea. Cool.
And as part of the broader conversation, the tour indicated more generally around your reserves, what we should do with the different things around the piece. I think that's a really good idea, Sally, and it would be probably worked into the LTP program, so that you're receiving that advice up at the same time as we are starting to do some rate modelling. Because one option, of course, for council is to go, actually, these are some really good projects, but we also want to use some rate impact, so we'll use some of that offset rate. So definitely as part of the LTP, we'll do like that. Thanks, LTP, which will be starting.
Lucky you.
So when we get to that resolution, we'll certainly for that item.
Thank you.
So the next one is for the turf, is the money of tofu. So what we had in terms of the results there is strong support for the turf. It was pretty evenly split between the two funding options. So our third option from a rating perspective was the rate funded option in the 26-27 financial year. The community pretty equally also liked the option of a grant loan funded over a period of 10 years, and about 25% did not support this grant. So I open it up to
loan and grant funded. And I'd just like to say, I think they're really struggling, these guys, to even get their mechanism with the education board going. So while they may not be getting started, it's good for us to give them support, because they're struggling to get the valuation of the buildings they're going to sell and the buildings sold. So it's probably going to be a longer process, but if we can make a decision in my eyes of support, probably grants funded. If it doesn't get drawn down or doesn't happen.
So that is a slight challenging and for chip in here. So say if you were supportive and you went for option A, which is fully rate funded 26, 27, and it doesn't happen, we have taken that money out of our community bank accounts and put it in ours. So if there's a chance it's not going to happen, a funding option would be, what would be, would there be a better funding option, sorry, Paul?
I guess we got reserves sitting there.
Not really.
So we don't,
It's the reserves in the minute tell them any difference, district-wide funding.
Yeah.
well, as I said prior to the break, the object is to use the local reserves first before moving into district-wide. One of the other issues around this is, if we're talking, the Nanny Toto spreading over 10 years, that's probably not going to help them either. So it's either going to be rate funded right now, or maybe it's a discussion with them to, and I think it was talked about at the hearings, was pushing it into year 2 of the LTP to give us a little bit of certainty. We could put that in year 2, and that's dealt with at an annual plan level rather than dealing with it now. But what I kind of heard was that they want to, it's been so long, pushing in another year is they're not keen to do that. So
Well, I don't know, I don't think it'll be any disadvantage for South because they possibly haven't got their mechanism going.
What's the, David, I wonder, given that you have done a number of turf upgrades in recent times, what's the lead-in time for a turf upgrade?
It's about 3 or 4 months. So I know they've been working with people and they've got a design and everything ready to go. So by the time they get all their funding, it's probably about 3 to 4 months to get it on.
But they're struggling to get their own funding, that's the problem.
Yeah. So I think they were delayed already, which is why we've got a 26, 27. If that delay is still happening, then it sounds like it's going to be a 27, 28, maybe later type. Because my understanding a year ago, we first looked at this, that was going through the MOE process, and that's been slowed down. Was yeah. But I mean, from basing what I've bring the turf down, it's 3 or 4 months.
But if we're doing this in year 2, then if things don't work out, we'll know.
Yeah.
An annual plan next year.
Yeah.
So really, we're signalling what we could do if everything lines up. If it doesn't, then we cross that bridge. And,
I don't think it's a risk that we
that's right.
are unwilling to take.
No,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah, and if we keep that out of year 1.
Yeah, it's not in year 1,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
and we get a chance to push it out, pull it back, whatever.
In the annual plan, we can revisit it.
Yeah.
And they need to understand whether we are in support or not. You know, it's a big difference to their
Yeah.
application, whatever they.
We get funded,
Yeah.
we're supporting, they can apply for more funding.
I'm sure of one thing, between now and 1 July 26, it will change.
Yeah.
I just want to add that you've consulted on it now. If you push it into year 2, you don't necessarily have to reconsult at an annual plan level because you already know what your ratepayers are thinking in terms of the end. The majority of them kind of want it. So I guess you could push it to year 2 without any problems of having to reconsult on the item. You could look back to this and say, yep, it was wanted. We're just moving it to year 2, and then it would flow through an annual plan process. And you wouldn't necessarily have to consult the annual plan if you pushed it into year 2.
If we worried just having it in the next 12 months, but year 2 actually gives
It's actually year 3. Or is it?
year 2.
If they came back and said, in 6 months' time, we're ready, we could put a paper up to council again and say, can they get the 200 grand that they've asked for? And we'll rate for it in year 2, as we would do. So there's no stopping, you just would run a small deficit in your reserve until that time you would rate for it. You wouldn't need to have to reconsult again because the same rules apply. You have got the feedback from the community. So it's really the rating side of it could occur in year 2 without any problem if they came back earlier and said, hang on, you know, we're ready to go now, can you contribute the 200? And you would then make a decision based on that on a standalone basis. And we would recommend that it would be funded in year 2 and they would get their money when they need it.
Nigel.
Yeah, I have a different view of this proposed expenditure, which is that it's a nice to have, not a have to have. It's not sticking to a nothing, and we're looking at rate rises of more than 30%. And with the proposed rate funding for this project, I just don't think it's something this council should be supporting.
And I guess that is a consideration for us to all think about, recognising that there's another one coming after this. This first one is an upgrade of a current facility that we don't own. And the next one is a completely new facility. And there is a case to be made for, no, this is a nice to have. And we don't do that here. And it's very difficult. We have been told by this government that nice to haves are off the table for local government, and we should be sticking to the basics. And then we had a large number of submissions, including in person at the hearings, that said well-being and people's ability to engage socially and culturally and environmentally is very much a core role of this council. And now it is on us to weigh those two diametrically opposed challenges and come up with the best decision.
Community spoken.
Mm.
And as facilities go, a hall to a family and an adult that might be, has got the same weight of community engagement as a turf to the kids would be.
Mm.
And that's, you know, I think we're looking at different, but they provide the same thing, don't they? It's a facility for teams, for groups, for, you know, we've got all the groups that are coming to the little halls that wouldn't be there. Teams are the same. More kids will be involved in sport if you've got that opportunity, because it is prohibitive travelling to. Even if Dunstan gets the turf, like they said, it would be a different kettle of fish for the people in money, so they're not one or the other. So I agree, it's outside of for business, but if we put in that wellness and community lens on it, yes, you are anywhere. But it's hard. I've got kids in my health team, I've said the other day, travelling from Ramsford to play for a team, so they can't get enough kids together. Hour and a half each way to a turf.
So just a response, I'm not arguing against it because it's not a good thing, it is a good thing. But look at the rate rise we put through last year, look at the proposed rate rise we're putting through this year, and how you can justify expenditure on this or the other item around turf is frankly beyond. I mean, it's easy to you know, put out there the emotional thing that's good for the well-being of the kids. That's a given. Our job is really to look at the larger picture of what is happening in terms of financials, and to me, proposing to go with the rate rise as high as it is, I think makes it imperative that we save money wherever we possibly can. And this is, it doesn't matter which way you cut the cooking, this is a nice to have.
And I also look at, I don't want to be doing the Ministry of Health's job for them, but the figure is for every $1 we invest in sport facilities, the payback is $3.70 in health savings. And we already know how pressed we are to access health. The longer we can keep people fit and active in this community, the better for all. And that's not this council's role either. But we are here for our people.
The key thing for me here is that, Nigel, I'd love to agree with you, but I can't. Because otherwise we're going to stop putting a cricket pitch in Molyneux Park. We're going to stop looking after Alpha Street and Anderson Park for rugby and cricket as well. And I think that you know, the wellness of our community, especially our young, for the future, is our core business. Because if it's not, what the hell are we doing? And none of these things come cheap. You're 100% correct. This should be funded by the Ministry of Education. This is wrong. But guess what? The education system in this country has been wrong for so long now. If we waited and kept on saying it was wrong, nothing would happen. Most of the schools wouldn't have what they've got. You know, Cromwell Primary, Goldfields built their school halls, some ministry money, but sod all. You know, so if we don't support ourselves, and that's what we're doing here, we're supporting ourselves. And if you look at what the community said to us, there's an overwhelming support for options A and B to do something. And I'll have the same argument when we get down to Dunstan as well for the same reason. You know, if you want to look after your community and the younger people in it particularly, but the older people use turfs as well. You know,
March your band.
yeah, I did as an older person running around that Cromwell turf.
Yeah, that's good.
That's good. So yeah, so I understand and share your sentiments, Nigel, but actually it's not a reason for me that we should say no, we're not going to be here. And I would have thought from a community perspective, that's the one particular thing to say, we get that, we understand why you're doing it, as opposed to comparing it to supercars or some other.
And then it will property.
For these guys, they've got a brand new school. I'm just seeing the stuff they're possibly losing, and they need that upgraded. They're a long way from getting it over the line at the moment. That's in West Western, and they want, but I can get support from us, so I've been in favour of giving support. But
So, I was just gonna say, I think for me, reading the submissions as well, and just realising the impact it has on families travelling. So you've got the kids that are coming from Roxburgh and from out in the Maniatoto that have to get all the way to Cromwell at the moment. So even if, you know, we had something closer, but also, yeah, I just think it's a huge, and there's a massive backlog with the turf in Cromwell because it can't, not everyone can train there. So kids are training really, really late at night as well because we don't actually have enough turf in the district. And
It's not just hockey, so obviously that comes from specifically, but
Yeah.
that relevance, but it's multi-sport.
Yeah.
and going back to the Maniatoto, they will raise the $700,000 because they do
Yeah.
everything else. They
Yeah.
get kicked in the teeth. So
Yeah.
it's just whether we support it or not. Our community board definitely supports it, and
if we're pushing it out a year. we're
yeah,
not
it has to go there because I don't think they're really out there really dealing with the market.
That would be ideal.
So we're not risking any rates this year, and if they can't get over the line,
It's
then,
near rates next year,
Yeah.
it doesn't happen.
Well, the proposal already had it kicked out to year two anyway.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
so it's in year two, it's not in year one.
Mm.
And if you just look at it, it's $13.48 per ratepayer across the district.
Mm.
And I know it all adds up, but
Mm.
it's $13.48.
I'm happy to have that in at the moment, but does anybody who's not had an opinion want to say anything before we move on to the next one?
I guess coming from raising my kids in the sport in Dunedin, everything's accessible. At 5-10 minutes and you were at the sports grounds. I think the biggest impact here is it's the amount of time that you're on the road getting your kids to whatever ground it is. And initially I wasn't in support of this because of the education, it was on grounds that weren't necessarily ours. However, if I think beyond that, and I were taking my stepchildren, it was all over the Central Otago district and sport, the whole weekend, and so that's the difference is that we don't have, it's not accessible, it's not on our backyard, on our back doorstep, we have to travel. That's, I think, one of the reasons why this particular one is perhaps the exception to the rule. I do agree with you. It is also an exception.
Okay, so that would sit in from year two, is it?
Yeah, so what I would need to do to reflect that is change it to out, because that takes it out of year one,
All right.
and then I'll just manually add 200
But am I missing something here?
into year two.
Because the options we put out was in the 26-27 financial year, so it is year two.
Oh, really?
So that is moving it out of year one, which we've inadvertently done in the background, and moving it into year two as. Yeah.
Oh, okay, right.
But the rate's not this year, it doesn't affect.
With the errors.
Oh, so we actually had it in year one. Oh,
But it just said the wrong financial year.
But it will affect if we move it
Yeah.
out.
So that's good.
This year's
Yeah,
figure
yeah,
doesn't
right.
affect.
sorry, I just.
Trying to get 200 coming around.
Yeah, so that one's coming out, yes, it was a new one.
Yeah.
And they'll put it to year two, which is that one.
Make sure we take it out.
I'm just waiting for you.
Yeah, like I said, it gone.
For that to be rate funded over that financial year as opposed to 100 is the option.
So, well, let's just, we can quickly move up here. So we're now 13.39 and 6.8, so we're still below 7% on the average rates increase for year two. So,
13.39 with that 200 out.
yeah. So what we've done is it was in.
Yeah.
So we need to take it out of year one and put it into year two, so that's why there's a minus.
I thought it was still down then.
Yeah, no, that's.
The minus is in the left-hand side. If he made his negative numbers red, it would be easy.
The next
Sorry,
time.
sorry, Paul.
Moving from there to the next one.
So the next one for the first at Dunstan High School. So this is for a $300,000 grant, very similar results for the consultation. So overwhelmingly, the community were in support of giving the grant, divided again between rate funded over one financial year, which is, we have this as the next financial year, 25-26. So we'll check the date that is correct. And option B, which was the grant loan funded over a period of 10 years, also got strong support of 34%.
Is that like the out of the series that Jeremy was speaking about in behind the community?
Well, that's it. What it
Yeah.
is,
Yes, and that's a really good point, sorry, to now, and it's that, yes, that was suggested by the Vincent Community Board Chair. Another option is $300,000 out of Vincent reserves, and if we had a look at earlier, we can confirm there is enough in Vincent reserves to do that if you wanted to make that rate.
And that was the recommendation from the community.
Very generous. Do you want to cover off maybe some of those? At some point, we will need to use those reserves that have been gathered for only those communities. They cannot go into a communal pot that then becomes a district-wide reserves. They will have to be used within the communities where they've been generated. Is that accurate?
That's correct, yeah. So that's what I was trying to allude to earlier on, where we would be using ward-specific reserves for ward projects that are occurring in a ward, even though the thing has been districtised. So you use the reserve first, and then you go to the district, so that the reserve funds are used up. Otherwise, they sit as stranded reserves and don't have to use them.
And I think, if I may, Madam Chair, if it's good discipline to be had to using reserves, because if it's a rainy day fund and you keep it in your back pocket, and we keep rating our community for things, I mean, I think it behoves us that we should have a process to use reserve in a meaningful way that contributes to assets and paid for before.
It seems logical to do that, and I guess the question I alluded to earlier on is whether and when the reserves contributions account from resource consents is appropriate or not. And because that will sit in, I would imagine, the same thing in ward buckets as well. And to me, it probably makes no odds here, but I think we shouldn't lose sight of that as well, and saying, well, could this money be used from the reserves contribution on a non-reserved bit of land? Don't know, arguably could make it. But either way, it's going to come from some sort of reserve account of the Vincent Ward, which I think makes perfect sense. And it reflects, if you like, what has happened, and I know in the Cromwell Ward, where if it took the hockey turf, the community board has provided significant funds to that over the last 20-something years. It's been there, in fact, twice, because it's been upgraded to a water turf, and it's coming to reserves contribution for the same reason. So it makes sense for this sort of thing to say, well, the money's there, use it. So those many of Kato aren't quite so fortunate. That is what it is. So we all put our big boy pants on and we help out.
So reserve contribution and Cromwell have been generated from land sales and everything.
No, reserve contributions from resource consent, which is separate again.
So it's not an argument for development contribution to be following something.
Development comes further down the track.
No, because we do our reserves contributions from under the district plan, not the development contributions policy.
Yeah, and I think the reserves contribution that shouldn't be confused with general reserves.
Two different buckets.
two different things.
They are. And the other issue we need to investigate, I'm not a planner, I don't know enough about it, is the nature of the land. If it's not owned by us, can we apply reserve contributions to?
You
stuff?
can do anything if you put your mind to it.
We're dangerous.
And your question is right. That's the first hurdle.
Recognising that it's not public land as in our land, but it is public land as in it is owned by the government.
Just the safest second option.
I like to think on the basis that that is the recommendation of the Vincent Community Board, that they are happy for some of their reserves to be spent on this turf. Are we happy to progress it to the next step for this part? And Louise is going to tell us whether we can do it or not.
If you can use your reserve contribution, but taking the point of Peter earlier about using your reserves and not rating for them, these aren't rated, they are levied through resource consents, and so this is one reserve that you might think is appropriate to accumulate if you see in the future you're going to have something like a stadium or significant expenditure. If you whittle that away and you don't have the opportunity, because it's either for creation reserve, so green space within those developments, or capital expenditure resulting from more sets. And so you can, but there is the option also to use it in a different way.
Future capital expenditure for something like a stadium would be carried by the Empire District, would it not? Would it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But it could be that what you do is if it's say Cromwell wanted it and said, well, we'll put this much up because we've got a reserves contribution and it makes sense to use it for that because we think it's a worthy project and it'll offset the impact on the rest of the district. And I would argue that's the right thing to do and the right way to look at it. The issue about spending money on reserves that aren't ours, I would put akin to those reserves that we control that are Crown derived reserves. We spend ratepayer money on them already, and when that land is turned back, we lose it. So I don't think that's an issue. But with Ministry of Education land, I can't see the school in Maniatoto or Ministry of Dunstan High School actually not going somewhere. And if it is, you can guarantee that a new school they will be building what's there. So I think we're pretty safe.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
Could I just?
Yep.
Sorry, just, because I was prior to this conversation was going to oppose this as well, but I agree that.
But hey, stop. To the deep end.
If the Vincent community will want to put their money in reserves, in this clause highlighted, they've got to be used. That's their decision, it's not a council decision.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
In your reserves that you like, that's it in resolutions, but
Yeah.
we'll just need to name the reserve.
General reserve, Vincent General
That's what you
Reserve.
guys landed? Yeah.
Consultant to
I don't know how much is in
But that's
those.
the one that hadn't been given a gift of free.
Is it, you said Vincent General Reserves, didn't you, Jaden?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's fine, I think. Just,
Okay.
I'll bring that up.
No.
The next item I missed, unfortunately, so I must have the team. We did have our consultation, item number one, and that's as to, the CCO option, which of course we're consulting at the moment, for our, to continue to deliver in-house, which, there was some confusion, with status of status quo. It won't be status quo as we know it in-house with the regulations, that are coming. Unlike some other councils, we have a fairly even split with our community on this one. So 45% were in support of the council controlled organisation, and 55% status quo. Status quo is not status quo. Status quo is different. But more different data. So for this one, as you're well aware, you have agreed to consult. I'm joining with 4 other councils. You do need to resolve today whether or not you still support continuing to investigate that CCO option, or whether or not you want to have it in-house. So we do have it modelled here, option 1 in or out, and it's in year 3.
Yeah. Year 1 and 2 are already in.
Yeah.
It would seem perverse to change your decision, what you've got out there for public consultation. You just, I'll get both guns and shoot both feet.
Yeah.
An interesting point there is
No, we've done the right thing.
and gentlemen, it's thinking of standing
Mayor in the Waitaki has made it clear that he wouldn't want to be part of the council controlled operation. So where does that leave us?
He's got one vote, it's one vote, one vote.
And that's the reality. Each person who will be using water as a platform for upcoming local body elections needs to recognise they are one voice at the table and we are a team.
It's not all the same views.
With not all the same views. And
But democracy works well.
then sometimes we have a different view and then change it, which is also fun. Yeah. It doesn't look very changeable, does it? And on that too, I'm happy to share with you that as of very late last week, the government has kicked in $250,000 to the 4 councils to progress this work together. So the consultants that are being used to crunch the numbers, the mayoral video chat show format that we'll have coming out, our consultation support that we're having to process all our submissions and our comms support, that is not being paid for by the ratepayer, that is being paid for by the government contribution.
They didn't think they had any money.
They've got no money, but here's $250,000.
Great.
Yeah.
Good.
Start them to that extra zero.
They've got no money, but they've got no agenda.
Yeah.
Okay, so
We always knew that.
So are we happy that that remains the preferred option for now, that it is a CCO in as a recognising that all we're saying is that our preferred option at the moment is a CCO. We are currently consulting on what that might look like. No decision has been formally made. We've given an indication of where we think it's going. That could change.
yeah, yep. Okay, so that's all of them. Just keep forward to take you better. Oh, the mining royalties. Now, yes, sorry, that wasn't sorry, I was just doing the anticipation items. So now also within this paper, we have some mining royalties that we never, so this is done in Teviot, that the paper at the time never said where that the money was going to be recognised. So one option we thought, our emergency event fund is in a significant deficit. So we wondered, as an option, you can decide where would you recognise it in the budgets, the money that is received. But one prudent option is to offset that emergency event fund. That is, how much are we in the red with that much?
That's the rolling one. Oh, no, that's the next one. No, we are in surplus in that one, I think, the emergency. So we've got money in there, but the council did commit to building that reserve up more. So we have rated $120,000 per annum to go into that reserve. The next one down is the road emergency fund, which at last count was 900,000 in deficit because of the last 2 events. And there's another, I think there's a paper coming to council at its main meeting with another 159,000 request, which is going to tip it over $1 million. And the council decided that it was going to, as part of its initial LTP budget discussions, we put 165,000 in that reserve plus the petrol tax. So this 165,000 is rates funded to reduce that accounts deficit. What we thought was that this was probably the best bang for buck in that it reduced the rates requirement by nearly 300,000, but still kept the reserves being increased and the deficits being reduced. And that's why we've suggested that those amounts can go in there. We haven't budgeted for that because it's a very, I think we've just received the feedback that of what we know we're going to get now going forward. So
we know what the money is that we'll get and it will cover that.
Absolutely, yeah. We think that that's very prudent and we, there are factors, obviously it depends on gold price and it depends on how much they can dig, but we think that there's enough.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Portsmouth.
So how much?
So if
We
you,
think that there's, we've put in just under 300,000 between the two. We still think that there's more upside on that 300,000 per annum. The first 3 months have been significant for us.
So I was going to just say, I think part of the weathering mining down at Hawkswood is actually on road reserve anyway. So I know a paper came to community board right at the start, and money from the road reserve would go back into roading because they are mining part of our road reserve, and then some of it was also on council land. I think that is
both council land, if it goes into the roading emergency budget, then it's going to the right place.
yeah, because it's some of that money is coming from the road reserve
Yeah.
within that mine. Is that right, Louise? I'm pretty sure that it's, yeah.
So if that was a change to in to show the,
I will change it.
if you put that in, you'll see the impact.
But is it the right place though?
You know what I mean?
I think we've had a number of papers that have come that have indicated that these two funds are going to be an ongoing issue for us as our climate changes. And the cost of repairs becomes more and more significant, and I would have thought that was the appropriate place to put a budgeted amount of money,
I agree.
an amount of money that's not coming from our rate payers. We've been looking for ways to diversify our income streams. Here is one. We're going to have to put it the smartest place we can.
In terms of that conversation that Saskia alluded to in the past, that was pre-districtisation. So districtisation has superseded effectively the conversations that the council had and the community board had when this was first put up. So we're looking at, A, we need to increase or fix the reserve, and B, we need to increase the emergency event fund because it's not as high as you probably would like to see it. If we threw it all into the roading reserve, we're only rating 120,000, so we'll only have a benefit of 120,000. Sorry, 165,000, we've got them round the way. So that's why we picked both emergency reserve funds to eliminate both those rates contributions and still get an increase in the reserves.
Yeah, well, I don't think they're in the right place.
Where do you think it should be?
Well, because I think roading is roading. Because if you do that, we're subsidising the roading subsidy. The government will subsidise 51%. So I think the stuff that you're talking about, reserves account, Vincent have kindly given to the likes of the turf and these other issues should come from the found royalties. And that's effectively saying if we go to take your gold mine, it doesn't. It's only a safety net for emergency funds. It should be the emergencies now. The emergencies looking after these facilities now, so that fund could be invested better than it would be waiting to sit in an account for one of the damages past road runs out.
So I guess you're weighing up, are we putting it in a core business or are we putting it in a nice to have bucket?
I'm saying that royalties for gold mines going forward in the future, the next 50 or 60 years, goes into the nice to have buckets to fund the nice to have buckets for everyone. Because the infrastructure roading, whether you want to shut roads down, that's fine. I've just seen it in the Minnetonka when the road gets washed out because $70,000 you close it down. In this situation, you turn around and go, oh, the gold mining money from Teviot, $70,000 went from the back road to Naseby, and it goes nowhere. The government's say we're not funding it. So you've got a chance to pick up the nice to have bucket every year. And in the next 50 years, you could have a really nice big bucket, which could deal with your all issues across the district.
But this year, with these incredible rate increase, this is a nice to have bucket for everybody.
So it's only to be stored away for when you have the damages class, watch out and do another bridge.
Yeah, but
It's not doing that, it's offsetting rates to the.
how much is the deficit, those accounts in deficit
$1 million,
currently?
$1 million.
The roading reserve will be 1059 roughly. 1059. So
$1 million in,
and if you remember, it was $500,000
Yep.
in deficit. We added another 480,000 roughly in deficit because the weather events are now not spread out. They're actually becoming almost business as usual.
Yeah.
So the type of money that we are pulling out to fix these things, and it's only 159,000 this time, but I think the October one, I think it was October, was a significant chunk of money. So, the amount that you would need to put in to cover the emergency reserve, the roading emergency fund, would start to increase over time.
And
The
I'm
other one
saying,
is in funds, but,
I'm saying that their roading budget isn't big enough anyway. And that's what we're doing. We're robbing Peter to pay Paul. That's why we haven't done our roads, our bridges and our work. So if we have a fund of money that subsidises that, that's the two handle list is exactly what royalties are. They go flow down all the way through our communities and take it somewhere else.
But it doesn't matter, because you're still going to fund those nice to have some rates, so all you're doing is just robbing Peter to pay Paul, so you're the here and now.
You're taking them out of rates, a lot of them.
I think you confuse
Yeah.
different things.
No.
Yes, you are.
And apart from anything else, if we make a decision today to do as has been suggested by Paul, put them into these two emergency funds, that's not setting a precedent. You could sit down at the same time next year and do something very different. And emergency fund, by definition, is an emergency fund. And to conflate it with business as usual and road.
And the argument I'm putting up is that we aren't funding enough for our roads, including the disaster events. That's a rate payer, the whole rate payer should be contributing to all the emergency funding. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. I think you're putting it in the wrong pot.
This is a benefit for the whole rainbow. It's flying down as a nice to have in a really bad year.
Are you suggesting, Stu, that we could have, recognising that roading emergency works is nearly $1 million in deficit, and we would have $165,000 going into there? Is there, I guess, the ability for us to also be putting in an extra $50,000 of rating impact so that that deficit is paid off faster and into surplus quicker? So instead of taking it all out of there, we say, actually, we're going to pay 200 or 215, whatever, and 165 of that will come from royalties, because we should still be paying them.
Yeah, the road and infrastructure is everyone's infrastructure, regardless which part of Central Otago you're from. Now, whether that's a Clutha Business Bank or something else does that is a cost of doing business and living in this community is travelling on our road and infrastructure. And everyone must contribute to that. If we start subsidising that by using something else, the exact money we've been trying to cut out of our community facilities, that grant with it, now look at Terrace comes along. It's going to offset road and water rates if we get a royalty out of that.
That's a different kettle of fish, because that's not from our land. So you don't confuse what might happen with Santana, because it's actually not connected. That's a different proposition. This is royalties from our land, I believe, is why we're getting this money in the first place.
I think you're building too big a mountain on what's quite a simple decision right now for the next rating year. And I think it stops if that flow of royalties we're talking about at the moment continue. Next year you might decide something different.
Before we scroll up to the top, Paul, can you just add, what does it look like if we put $45,000 in there as a ratepayer's contribution to the emergency works fund before we go back up the top and have a look at what the number is?
And can I just say one thing as well, because I wasn't aware that this was going to come up today, and just, I know that we've districtised now, so just to make it really clear, we did have a conversation with the community board way back when about how those royalties, possibly would be spent or come back to our community. So I just want to be really clear why this is now a district-wide discussion, if we can just cover that.
What was the recommendation of Brooklyn?
So from what I can remember is that any royalties that were made over road reserve went to roading, because that is our policy, but I think there would have been some benefit for our community from these royalties if we hadn't districtised.
So what other land, is there other council land that's been mined?
Yeah, so there's and part of it is a road that goes through. So the road reserve part of the land, we did a land swap, didn't we?
I think you've lost that argument with district funding, unfortunately.
Yeah, but I just want to clarify that.
And I make the observation that I suspect if you were to be a little bit looking at what the TV could be missing out on here, go and look at where most of our emergency works are done on our roading, and I suspect that's probably in the Tibet and Manitoto wards, is my gut feel. Yeah. So actually, you're getting it back anyway. So yeah, Rob, pay back.
Yeah. Once you districtise, it's swings and roundabouts.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Six always make a good point. So it is what it is.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify that because I think that's fair to do that.
Yeah.
And so you got yours on.
Okay.
So the number is with adding 45K back in.
So that would be a total contribution of $200,000 to the emergency roading. Theoretically, 165 from mining royalties and 45 from rate pay.
Yeah, although we've done it the other way around, instead of having 175 reducing rates, we'd only have 120 reducing rates.
Yeah.
So we-
And then what would it be if we didn't add the extra 40 in?
Well, the number is 12.36
Yeah.
right now. And then if I took the 40 out, that's it. It's 12.27.
And I'm not too sure you could actually just arbitrarily today add some money in that you haven't consulted on.
We're already putting in 165.
So we're reducing the.
Oh,
So we're
sorry.
reducing that.
Yes,
So
yes.
instead of saying we're not going to pay any of that
Right,
165, so we've consulted
Yeah,
on
sorry.
165,000 and instead we're saying actually 45.
Thank you.
Given the level of rates, I'd argue you shouldn't even put in 40, you should just be very grateful for the fact that we've got those royalties available to offset a plus 30% rate rise for this year. Next year's another year.
You take the win. It's a bit like not putting the Three Waters depreciation by halving it. I think you take the win that you've got, and you can say, you said, well, that windfall there saves you $165,000 in rates. That makes sense for people to benefit that. And then what happens from now and then, we'll work it out for year two.
But I think you've got a big flashing neon sign saying 30+%. Bring it down, bring it down.
And you have,
We've brought it down a little bit,
No.
maybe. The only reason I would suggest we've consulted on 165,000 going in there. There's the potential for that all to be paid, or there's potential for us to still contribute to a bucket that's nearly $1 million in deficit that we know will be drawn on in the next 2 years. That's because we know there will be another emergency roading works that needs to be. So do we want to be reducing that bucket, that deficit more quickly?
so what I'm hearing you say is that because 165 was going to be funded from rates, making it 330.
No. Make it, we're going to fund 165,000 from rates.
Yep.
Instead, we could fund it from royalties.
Yes.
Or we could add it and make it 245,000
Yeah.
from rates and 165 from royalties. And then you've got 200 going into the bucket, but only 45,000 is being paid for by the rate.
Or equally, you could start what you were going to do and make that go down by 330,000 this year as well.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
what's the predicted rate rise next year is, so
7.39.
you got a lot more wriggle room when you talk about 2% rate rise.
Year to year.
Yeah.
That's it.
30%. Just take the win right now, what it is.
Isn't that, we've got ourselves in half a situation, because we haven't been reinvesting, and we haven't been.
We haven't been bumping it up by inflation each year.
Yeah, isn't that why we're walking down rubbery roads?
Well, but hang on, what we're doing here, what we proposed to do on the outset. So we're not changing from what we proposed to do. The question is, do you take the win, or you say, actually, I'm going to keep that number high and not give you the benefit of that win?
Yeah, benefit of the one this year.
We put some halls back in as well, so
We can have a partial benefit. It
Yeah.
can be a full benefit,
Well,
it can be a partial benefit.
I'm in your camp, of basically taking the benefit and adding what we originally consulted on, and if you want to get that number down for investment, get it down in 3 years.
Here and now is the high rate here.
Here and there is not the high rate year. We've seen what's coming. And yes, it goes down, but your water bill's going to go up. Nothing's going to be cheaper in 2 years' time than it is today. I'm really worried that if we go, $165,000 of free money, we're just going to take that, thanks. And what your $165,000 buys this year will not buy the same next year. And I think here's an opportunity for us to take a big chunk of that $165,000 win, put it in the pot, but add a little bit more.
Well, in that camp. And I think the roading thing, if you're going to get these events, it's all very well, if you live in somewhere where you're well above water and you're going to travel to our district. You've got to have that money in there. If you're going to have it there, put it in there. But it's not going to go away. You're going to have snowstorms. We haven't had a disaster yet.
And as Peter said, that royalties amount might go up. And there might be some money that can go into a nice to have bucket of rainbows and sprinkles were on top of everything. But at the moment, roading is one of our biggest challenges, and we do not want to get to the position where we're just continually funding things from a deficit bucket. And that was why we put it in that deficit bucket, and we didn't take the money out of the other emergency works, was because we wanted to highlight to this council that that bucket is a problem. And now here we have an opportunity to start alleviating the problem.
The wrong year, I think. To alleviate the problem.
But we're only.
Remembering that is the average limit, and that is not the average for towns. A lot of this is being carried by the rural community, and they are predominantly more affected by emergency roading works.
We live in one of the most isolated communities by distance in New Zealand, any coast. Our core infrastructure is roading and water and the other stuff. And if we're not going to fund those, $1 million goes nowhere. We've got 5 trucks and 10 diggers and a mob of consultants on a bridge. That is our cost of vending. And not every one of those roads is tar sealed. And the GDP that comes out of these rural bases, whether it be the Tibet, whether it be the Minnetonka, or up in the Kent, up in Albury on the road. It is our most important infrastructure we have in this area. And the snow, we haven't had 8 feet of snow like we had in Naseby 100 years ago. When that happens, we'll need $20 million to even get our bridges sorted out. And you're foolish to think it's not going to happen, because it will.
And I think we've gone out, I understand your concerns, Lily, we've gone out with a 13%. We've put 7, 8 halls back in, and we're still more than 0.5% ahead. We've put the Alex pool back in, and we're still more than 0.5% ahead of where we said we were going to be. I personally think we need to prioritise that roading emergency fund. We know that there are demands coming on that fund. And we've had a windfall, because until Paul put the in and in on those, we didn't know that we had an extra. That's a significant saving for us. And I think it would be unwise to just take it all and call it free money and say thanks very much. I think we can get further ahead by leaving, whether it's 45 or whatever, of that 165.
But gold royalties in one way or another will keep coming in.
Depending on the price of gold, which we also don't control. And when you look at it over the last 20 years, it goes up and it goes down.
The other thing is royalties would be good, nice to have pot to invest into stuff. Lots of the Blossom Festivals, lots of the events that have got a direct correlation to grants, because it's something that's derived by nature by everyone, for everyone.
I'm still saying this year is a nice to have.
So
Are we?
that 165, so I've taken the royalty adjustment out, so it's as if it was being rate funded, so it's the same sort of thing that you're talking about, and we're sitting at 12.58%.
So it's still, what was it, 12.27?
Yeah. That's
So
like,
it's saving up 0.3 of a percentage by paying 45 instead of 100.
no, it's 165.
Sorry, by paying 165. So if we pay 45 instead of 165, we're saving 0.3 of a percentage rates.
The only thing I'd say is if you're going to do anything like what you're talking about doing, that's all or nothing.
They do
It
like,
doesn't be all or nothing. It can be in the middle.
no, make it.
I think my logic would say it's either all or nothing. To get what you want to do, you might as well say, well, actually, for 0.04, you do it all.
That's modelled all or nothing. If they put the whole 165,000 of rates back in, if you wanted to make it something different, we could do the 45, which we saw what that was. I just thought.
What if you put 100,000, a round number? I get what Lindley says. She wants the people of today to have a bit of a win. Times are tough. We don't know what the next years are going to be.
Actually, this is probably one of the only things that actually directly affects rural communities.
And let's just not forget that we're an $80 million a year business, squabbling about less than $100,000.
Yeah, but I mean,
But a reality.
There's the disaster fund money predominantly is in the alpine rural gravel road infrastructure.
And they're paying the biggest uplift in this.
Yeah, but you can argue that till the cows come in. It is largely rural
So
until the time it isn't. I mean,
if we contribute $100,000, so we consulted on 165, If we said, okay, we'll take that 65 of free money because 165 of royalties would go in there anyway, wouldn't it? So we would make it 265 total.
Yeah, effectively.
$265,000 a year, attacking a $900,000 deficit, and we would come in.
There's also another about 200,000 from the fuel tax that we get, and that's going into the council.
So we could potentially have that deficit cleared by the end of this long-term plan, depending on how many more draws there were on it.
Yeah.
Which, wouldn't that be a great place to be? And that would bring us in an average of less than 12.5% when we consulted on a 13.0. And we've put a whole heap of halls and a pool back in.
So we've got 0.5%.
But look at all the extra stuff you got, but you thought you weren't going to get the 13.
You're not getting the fridge. Shut up.
Are people comfortable with where that is at the moment for us to go through and start,
Yes.
you know, what the resolutions say?
I've
There's
made
one other thing that we wanted to cover off. A couple of those other topics that came up.
Yes, so, we heard, in the, oral submissions last week and obviously your written submissions and the presentation from the Vincent Board Chair, there were requests from the community, but for other things. So, you'll recall, Central Stories, this is a couple of examples to bring to front of your mind. Central Stories requested additional money, Blossom Festival request for that to go back in. There is an option if you wanted to put that in as a line item for the next couple of years to use the tourism reserves, and then and looking at the rest of the tourism reserves as to what the plan is for those. You'll recall last week there was a proposal for an event fund, a district-wide event fund. So just to bring those things to your mind again in terms of having a conversation now as to if there's sort of a willingness to fund some of those, and then we can come back and the formal resolution part and capture those. So really just open it for, I think, probably for debate and conversation amongst yourselves as to other stuff that you would like to consider.
And I did wonder on the back of that, given how many times this table has discussed the Blossom Festival and whether it is in or whether it is out, recognising that we have $400,000 of tourism reserves that can only be spent on things that would fulfil those requirements, whether for the 2 years of this long-term plan, we want to fund a $24,500 line item for the Blossom Festival from that $400,000. That could then be re-looked at the end of this long-term plan when we say, well, what does councils look like going forward if we're not delivering water?
Definitely.
Do we want to have that as a potential?
Since Friday.
Does that fit, Anne, Stephen?
Yeah, well, through we had discussed, I think, that in plan and there being district-wide event fund for the likes of Blossom Festival to kind of align with that. And so I'm thinking we have, or we're thinking we will bring back to you in relation to the reserve.
Probably cost more than. Think to bring it up every single year, we could have as a line item with that.
I think we probably understand the requirements of the Blossom Festival specifically and the data that goes with that for making that an individual item and as a line item, and then for a wider discussion around what if that is used for potential events funding or where else it might go. I think that would probably need to come as a paper to council. I don't think we really want to be plucking a number out of thin air saying, oh, we want to put $200,000 into events and then discover that no events want to come here. Or,
I think the thing you've got is that how much certainty can we give any event? And if you look at it saying, well, on a long-term plan, you can forecast 10 years, knowing that every 3 years it's going to be reviewed. So you might get the first 3, unless an annual plan says you're not going to get 2 and 3. And then it's up for grabs again. If you look at something like the Blossom Festival in particular and go, well, look at the district significance, in fact, regional significance of that particular event, and go, it is reliant on external funding to a very, very large extent. And if any of the major funders was to pull out in any way, shape or form, then I'd say that you'd have to say, can that event still survive? And I'd say it possibly won't. So if this community thinks the Blossom Festival is important enough and this council thinks it's important enough, then as a line item, it makes perfect sense. Keep it there, provide some certainty to the group as well. At the same time, you've got to make sure that you keep those groups working towards the right outcomes in terms of what the level of service is going to be and what's going to be provided and what's going to happen to make sure that you're getting value for your investment for the community. That's not hard to do and probably already happens with the money that Vincent give it anyway. So yeah, some robustness around that, but provide some certainty. And that's one of the biggest things that those sort of big events, especially, and then the smaller ones as well to an extent, Suckermont was having that certainty. And if, you know, I don't imagine that anybody wants to be the organisation that was instrumental in actually killing the Blossom Festival.
It's an institution.
And the central stories, I think it needs certainty as well.
I think that's more of a challenge because we have a number of museums delivering functions for us, whereas we only have one Blossom Festival.
And it's not an event.
And it's not an event. And although the Central Stories does an amazing job, they're funded to deliver a museum and they deliver so much more than that.
I did
Which is a challenge. Alex?
Relation to the ongoing support, but just I can't remember from my head in terms of the discussions we had around promotions and events policy at the end of last year, where we were looking at events where the types of things that didn't look to go on a ongoing basis, that it was year by year because of the nature of them. Lots of people at a different type of event, but make sure we're still aligned with that policy and how you.
I think we are still aligned with that policy, recognising that the Blossom Festival sits aside from arguably every other event in Central Otago.
And council in your discretion, you can change your policy. So if you guys wasn't quite aligned, it's. But yeah, so they make an exception.
In regards to Central Stories, I did wonder if staff could bring a report back on an operating model so they could give us suggestions, because we've heard from Central Stories, but could we possibly get a paper back to us with some suggestions?
I think, and the staff had the discussion yesterday, actually. The challenge going forward is that sectors of our community will seem to be investing quite heavily into Cromwell Memorial Book. And then some will say, but you're running this on a string bean thing, and they might see an unequitable situation with it. Somehow we probably have to look how do we address that.
Yep.
I think it's fair to say that with districtisation, council still become to the fact that council now will be setting a museum policy for the district, and Cromwell and Central Stories and all the other museums sit within that umbrella. And so I think it's more than just when you report on Central Stories. I think having a set of policies that.
I think the council agreed to the status quo for this part of the financial when we took it over, so it's just like for like, but it's just been funded from council as opposed to the community boards in the past. But the big difference is the significant investment we put into the Cromwell Memorial Book.
But that I agree, but that still should be seen through the lens of a district-wide museum policy, in my view, to include Central Stories and Cromwell and the other museums.
Yeah, we'll have to give that some thought.
Check the reason for that is probably the two Gs to progress that to the Brunswick back to council. I do think it is an unresolved issue. Definitely hasn't felt like put it out the whole time I've been here. So 2027 might be the year for us to make some decisions around Central Stories. So
it is unresolved, and that probably highlights that there's maybe more of a role for us to play, but we don't know what that looks like yet, and we don't know how to make that fair across the district. So given that we are building a new facility in Cromwell and that will be part of the conversation, I think we do have to have a re-look at it. And I guess that's kind of been the bubbling along in the background the whole way has been, it was Alex ahead, and now with the building of a new facility in Cromwell, it'll be Cromwell ahead, and then you've got other facilities as well. It's a big piece of work.
And within the council's busy funding a heritage trust for 50,000 a year and a museum trust for 50,000 a year. And that's going to be part of that conversation as well.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think that would ties them together.
Did we finish the the goal to this conversation?
Yeah.
Did we decide to put 40,000?
No, we said 100, round it out,
No, 40,000 from ratepayers.
100,000 from ratepayers.
Up to. Good job done earlier.
Up to 12.46.
use everything.
It's still
Right.
12.48%. I mean, 100% you're better off with the total.
Thank you.
Make it
Thank you.
tough.
I just want to for all those many pages of submissions that you heard that, you want to have a conversation on. Any ideas, that you want to flush out now, over and above what's been, obviously, in the raising, those three items that I sort of picked out of things that have come through strongly.
Well, I went through the breakdown of all the different comments we've got. And I've got a whole lot of highlights of stuff that we haven't talked about.
Yep.
And I'm just wondering how the hell are we gonna make sure now, I'm sure the staff comments have got them, but I can't reconcile that now going, did I read that there or not? And that's what worries me is you look at some things, shade sales over playgrounds, council waste, the CEO gets paid too much, councillors don't get paid enough. What else did it say?
I want submission on the fact that council is
Oh, sorry. Maybe I just tried to. Maybe I missed that. I just remember I was listening. Thanks, Martin. But partnering and housing, there's a whole lot of stuff I got from the tail end of that. How the heck are we going to go through that? And there's probably more than 100 different ones. Are we confident that we've got the responses and what we've read in the staff report, the staff comments to those things that we've got to cover?
It's an impossible question.
It's going to be the challenge as we get more and more submissions coming through, as we are going to become more reliant on the likes of AI to pull out things to make sure that comments and good suggestions have not been missed.
Yeah. What have we said about dog park support in Cromwell? What have we said about that?
Longer and die.
No, I'm just going on what the submission was. I didn't see one with anything to do with the linger and die. But that's what my concerns are. I say, well, actually, do we have to? That's the wrong word. When we go through every one of those things, go tick, tick, happy, job done or not? Are we going to do that? And I don't know the answer.
And then we had the guy submitting on, the cycleway across the bridge that has come up in the past. But, I think he's really passionate. Maybe, it could be for him to get us a group together like they have with the river park, because there was a passionate group of people that have moved that project forward, so someone that's really passionate about that,
Gold mining royalties, we could do some of those things.
Yeah. I think it was a child because there's people all around him was down on the ground on the footpath up by Institute Road. I think it's important.
So, I think people did come forward with some really good ideas, and it would be really nice for those people to be able to keep progressing some of their ideas forward and to be able to bounce back to us with updates potentially, but doesn't necessarily become our thing, but I think we should help them.
So maybe my question is actually to the staff saying, are you confident what you put in the staff response to these things covers off all those things?
As confident as I can be. For 2021, my recollection is what we did was by exception. And the Tim sort of took us through it, and we councillors raised things by exception. I can't guarantee that we have caught everything. It was a really truncated timeframe. I did not have the time to go through all of them and make sure staff had points against everything. So I guess today it really is for the stuff that you guys have read. If there's things that you think haven't been addressed, to raise them is probably the best way to do it.
Yeah.
I do see the issue here in terms of to go through them one by one will be a journey and continue tomorrow.
Yeah, and that's the issue. Because if you look at the agenda, there's a spreadsheet that shows that you're not going to see on one screen because it's too small.
Yeah.
And I can say that I've gone through and I've looked and go, it looks okay to me, but can I be sure that everything has been picked up in the analysis of the submission, which is a bit difficult.
Yeah, and I really would rely on my GMs to give that assurance across the areas.
Yeah.
It's nothing really new in there. There was a bit of misconception around the CCA proposal, which relates to purely seeing things in the public.
Because all we're going to do is we're going to have to sign off and say we accept what the response is. I'm not saying we shouldn't, and I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm just going, one of the bugbears is that huge number of submissions,
Which is great,
Yeah.
and that's what we want.
but
And some of them have come through with some, different ideas, like the cycle trail, which is not different from what we had in the plan, not necessarily a new idea. But a lot of these nice to haves and these new projects that we're potentially signing off on today have been driven by the community. The community has got behind something and made it happen and asked us to support it at the last hurdle type thing, or to come with the last piece of the puzzle. And I think that shows that it's working well. There are a couple of ideas for, shade sales and things like that. And I guess if there's something that's got merit that will have been picked up by David and his team of, or actually, yes, we could put another shade. I remember the bottle for metal slide at Miners Lane, I think came in the last LDB, and eventually we discovered that maybe that wasn't a good idea.
But I also wondered, with the outdoor pool at Alex, we've agreed to keep it, which is great because that's what the community wanted. And if they want all the other fancy bits, then maybe it's a community group that also gets together and does some fundraising for some of the fancy bits that they want at the outdoor pool. We've done our bit.
The 100 slides.
And if they want to, let them form a little committee and let them do some fundraising. And we've agreed to keep the pool going, but do we have to do all those other things as well?
Now, often people do come out, like, kids play at the ball, for example, that's done by the parents group, that stuff, so.
Yeah.
There are things that can be done,
Right. Shall we go
One by one.
one by one to the resolutions, please?
Thank you. So Wayne has, we did get these resolutions very generic, because we didn't know that they were going to decide. But Wayne has helped me, did something earlier, depending on the citizens. So,
And if you we'll just pause at the beginning of each one, and then anybody who has a conflict can indicate that they won't be voting on that.
yeah, so we take them one by one. Madam Chair, we can probably do A, B, and C as one.
Discussions, we just.
C was proves the receipt of the following late submission.
we haven't talked about it yet.
Let's do A and B as one.
Yeah, that's the order that we talked to them.
Okay, right. So yes, A and B, Madam Chair, we could.
So A receives the report and accepts the level of significance, and B notes the submissions received and thanks the submitters for their feedback. I'm happy to move that. Martin's going to move it. Thank you. I'll second it. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried.
Okay, so C on our volumetric water charges would be to agree to set the volumetric water charge at $1.60 per cubic metre. There's a fixed charge of $682, is it correct?
I don't know that we were going to go straight from $1.60 to $2.40, but be all about that.
Signal that it will again rains.
I mean, we can set a number and don't take outside down yet.
We can always change it.
Was it further?
No, just plug yourself in.
Yeah.
You might want to.
And propose for considerations being given for year 2 to your next number. Just because I don't.
Charges with that appropriate.
Fixed charge.
Because you might, depending on what the papers for you, you might find that it's not a 30%. It's only a 20%.
We'll have to leave it at $682.97 for this year though, won't we? For a fixed charge.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah.
But I do agree with Julie for the next financial year, it does make sense to keep it a bit more generic inflation, etc. On that.
And can I just say that depending on how many rating units we have in our system or connection charges for our water, that number, the fixed charge will change depending on how many people we have in twin times.
What can we put, agrees to set the volumetric water charge at $1.60 per cubic metre with an indicative fixed charge of $687, look at $682, because it'll be something closer to that. And then for the 25-26 financial year, and then do we want to put a dollar amount in for next year, or do you want to?
What does it make for the annual plan for the resolution? If we don't have it firmed up here, does it mean then you have to consult again?
Well, what we're signalling is the increase. The unknowns are going to be what prices may have done in terms of the costs associated with stuff that you want to do that would impact whether it's going to be $509 or $525 or $485 or whatever. So I think that that's too vague. It's not accurate enough for us to say it will be indicative of that.
Yeah.
I think that the signal that you're trying to put across is the cubic metre signal, and I think that's the important part of this.
Could it be up to? Yeah, then you have scope to go below that if you chose to.
$2.40 you're talking about.
Yeah, up to.
So to be confirmed in the
Yeah.
26, 27 annual plan.
Which means it could be lower than that.
Yeah, but we're going to budget $2.40, so
Yeah.
that's what we're going to budget in year two.
Yeah.
To give the indicative rate. Are we happy to go with do you want to go to $2.40 or do you want to go to $2? Or do you want to go to $1.80?
Indicative price of $2.40 subject to costs. It's subject to other costs at the time, really. Not just below, you can go above $2.40.
This potentially could be the last time you set that.
True. Yeah.
And the other thing that you've talked about, Peter, is we kind of want to take year two as year two and hopefully not have to consult because we've already signaled this sort of stuff.
That's right.
Now, so I think you're kind of right. You need to decide on the number that you would like to move it to. And then whatever comes out of that, comes out of that. You can still make a decision if you think it's too high or the savings have been not enough or too much. You can still change it in the annual plan process. It's really a signal right now to ratepayers and users of what you're thinking of moving to.
So we don't need to qualify the figure 240 too much, we can just, as long as it's in there.
You need to discuss 240 now as well, and how much participate in the bimetric charge.
Yeah.
And then that fixed charge is basically whatever's needed.
Whatever's needed.
So that's the bit that change. But you need to see the
And that is the trajectory that water's going over the next 9 years.
That's the most important message we need to get out. It's going that way. It wasn't anyway.
You've got your thinking face on there. Do you want to make a comment?
Yep.
No.
I don't know how you can have an indicative fixed charge for next year.
Well,
It's either,
because Donna
it's either
said,
682.97 or it's not.
no, well, Donna said if we have more rating units come on, it'll change. It might be 681.23 or.
Yeah, I think rather than indicative, say,
That's what it is.
charge of that subject to adjustments due to number of rating units. I don't think indicative, for me, that's just too broad. So you get the same result, but indicative sort of says, well, it could be that or it could be 750. That's indicative.
That's a good idea.
Not that indicative.
Exactly. Yeah, that's,
Do you, if you want to take that out, with a fixed charge of $682.97, subject to total number of rating units.
Yeah, that's
something like that.
That would be the only thing.
yeah, that's only going to affect it.
Speaking of water, it's beautiful water source.
You should wash it there, innit?
What?
Last time I had to fill.
Yeah, it's going to be a wash.
Oh,
Spruce.
just imagine.
Uh,
Years off. And you put in years on.
Stayed elevated.
Yep.
Stayed
Yeah, that glass in it.
That's what.
First time council meeting, there's a film of them selling the glass and the water was so warm.
Oh.
Now, that's.
$2.40 come the following year?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm not hearing anybody say anything else.
So Wayne, I think if that's we countervated and we get rid of the and up to, we've got and $2.40.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you suggested the subject, the total number of rating units actually relates to both the 25-26 year and the 26-27.
Year ones.
Yeah.
Nothing post that.
Yeah, and then.
Right. Any other discussion on what that looks like? A moment. B.
I think we should do each one, because I want to vote against that one.
Yep.
So, yeah,
Well, I'll read it out and then we'll,
I think you said D, sorry.
no, C.
Oh, beg your pardon, sorry.
We're only going to do C, we'll do one at a time.
Yeah, that's what I thought, yeah. Okay, sorry.
C agrees to set the volumetric water charge at $1.60 per cubic metre with an indicative fixed charge of $682.97, subject to a total number of rating units for the 2025-26 financial year, and $2.40 per cubic metre with a fixed charge of $509.24, subject to a total number of rating units for the 26-27 financial year. Somebody happy to move that? Nigel, thank you. Seconded. Sorry, Paul, yeah.
That 509 is not right because that's based on this year's stuff, which isn't inflated. Next year, year two will be inflated. So I'm not sure, sorry, I was just confirming with Julie. I'm not sure we actually need to put the 509 in there. I think the important bit is the $2.40. And as Julie said, the fixed rate falls out the bottom and it is whatever it is. Unless you want to fix it at 509 and then you run the risk of not funding enough.
Well, then you can just only from here.
Okay, so we're going to put $2.40 per cubic metre for the 26-27 financial year.
Yeah.
Do we need to have and associated?
I'd say, an
charge?
associated fixed charge.
Yeah, that's fine, as long as you're not specifying the fixed charge, because you can't.
Because it'd be subject to the total number of rating units, and be subject to inflation, would be subject to anything else that happens that you're anticipating.
Yes.
If you have associated fixed charge, you don't need the subject to then anymore, I don't believe.
No.
No, that's right.
Yeah.
So just 2-4.
Thank you for that amendment. Thank you. A seconder, please. Martin, thank you. All those in favour? Against?
Absolutely recorded, yeah.
Recorded?
And my disappointment to those that also one on 920 didn't do the same.
Right. D. Agrees to the following actions for the community halls and facilities as outlined in the long-term plan. Do you want to do each one individually, or do we think that we will be happy to lump some of them together?
Okay.
So the way that we've put it in, so we'll just do all of I first, not I.
Yeah.
So the following halls and facilities to remain under council ownership: Ophir, Paulburn, Bex, and that was going to have a caveat with a discussion to be had in 2 years' time following the completion of the UNCO hub, Manahira Care hub.
So essentially with the review, post
With the
Manahira
review,
Care Community Hub, with the review.
Yeah.
Mm.
Post completion of
Post-completion, yes.
UNCO. Clyde Hall, Clyde Museum, Blythe Street, with a conversation on the continued lease arrangement. Clyde Railway Station with a conversation on the continued lease arrangements. Miller's Flat Hall, Ranfurly Hall, Wallace Memorial Rooms, Naseby Hall, Naseby General Store with a conversation on the continued lease arrangement. Centennial Milk Bar with a conversation on the continued lease arrangement. Any discussion on those? Somebody happy to move those? Please just have
One query, is that the words for the conversation, is that too open? Because I'm
I don't think so, because I think it is a conversation, and the basis of that conversation may result in the tenant not wanting to continue their lease, or they might want to do something different, or.
I wonder if the word is actually with a review. Yeah. Because then it's
Yeah,
that does involve a conversation, but just review probably says a little bit more than we're gonna have a chat.
yes, yeah,
Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah.
Review and those potentially.
Yep.
A review of the continued lease arrangements.
no, currently it's continuing where I've got commercial tenants.
I don't think
I
they
don't
are
think they-
commercial, I think they are community.
Both.
Yeah, it's not yet.
Doesn't make any odds. It's just still got to at least have a conversation about it.
Right, I'm happy to move those. Is somebody happy to second it? Thank you, Sally. Any further discussion? All those in favour? Against? Carried. Right, the following halls and facilities to be divested with further discussion with the various hall committees.
So what happens if,
I think that needs to say something slightly different.
yeah, what happens if those communities come back?
Facilities to be
Is it subject to further discussion?
Yeah.
Yes.
possibly.
Subject to further discussion with the local community.
Subject to.
Well, and I get argue, what happens if they say that they want to go back under council ownership? Is it proviso that?
Says that they've divested, but that it's subject to further discussion with the community halls who may say, well, we want to take it over or we don't. Are we just giving them first right of refusal effectively
Yeah.
before we
You're
divest it?
signing the death certificate for them now, that they have to divest them or they have to go. And for the argument of the Wedderburn Hall is the discussion hasn't yet, that I'm aware of, had to do what happens to the land. Does the land go with the divestment?
But depends on each hall.
The word subject to further discussion automatically implies that there's more than one option, one outcome.
But if they choose and the land doesn't go with it, they say they can't make an income off it, does it go back to council? That option is shut.
That's right, because some of the land, like the Wedderburn land, it's reserve land, so it's, we can't sell that, because if not, it belongs to the Crown, it's on site. But, this could be a slow burn, you know, because the discussion to divest, if this is the direction that comes out, it will potentially could be 12 months of discussions to reach some sort of understanding of the community.
You have to put that separate.
No,
It'll have to be a separate resolution.
okay. It's not going to be receiving the heavy doing cool.
Cool. So let's get this one done first. So how do you roll work out of Wedderburn? Divested subject to further discussion.
And divested is quite broad in its meaning as well. You know, we did say there's a range of options that could be what it means to be divested. So all those would have to be explored. So
I've got a question. If this would take like 12 months or so to have these discussions, won't we have to pay some operating costs on those halls in the meantime?
well, potentially we could
close.
that's right,
Right, yeah, okay,
and stop.
okay.
Right. I'm happy to move those. Is somebody happy to second? Thank you, Nigel. Further discussion. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Right, we missed out Fenton Library in the first one, so we just didn't do it on its own. Special. So Fenton Library remain in council control, back on the list effectively. Somebody happy to move? Thank you, Stu. Seconded, thank you, Ian. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. That the following facilities be divested. Valence Cottage, noting the need to engage with the committee. Clyde Police Lockup, Briarford Museum, Briarford Cottage, Alexandra writing for the disabled, noting that the old building, noting that the building should be demolished. Miller's Flat Bowling Club, Roxburgh Squash and Courts.
Oh,
Granbury Service Centre. Do we want to pull the one that we know we're just going to bulldoze? Should we pull it out and do it separately and say, just get on and bulldoze it? Would that be helpful? Doesn't really need any further discussion, does it?
Yep.
We pull that one out and do that one separately.
And can we do those on the same as we did with the other ones, subject to?
Yes.
That wasn't the enthusiasm from the crowd when we went around the tables earlier.
Well, it's a crown, yeah.
But as part of that divestment, that may well go to that route.
So it could be divested them.
It could be divested to them for $1 if they wanted to take.
So to the Ramsey Service Centre, at what stage then does the next step happen if the staff, A, shut it, B, move the staff, C, where do we go? What stage does that happen? Because it'll have costs relevant as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that'll be part of it.
Yeah, do you want to have that as a separate regulation? So we can do that on that.
Well, because like for a start, it's actually going to have quite a consequential cost for us as the council as much as anything.
But Janice will still be turning up there on the 1st of July.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Would be a suggestion that one in particular, that the resolution would basically, you'd agree to do it.
Yeah.
And as part of the 2027 LGP, for staff to come back with the new model and costings.
Yeah, because in my understanding, there will have to be a part of the cost of demolishing it.
Yes, that, yeah. And when you see all of that, of course, you might go, hang on,
Yeah.
we've got to weigh this up again. So I don't think that is a 2027 decision, but
Well, that
do it,
discussion.
yeah, we should go away and do the work.
Yeah.
Stu, is there any option to sell that building is it too far? Is it not good enough to take or?
Well,
No, it's fun. It's all right, straight.
I think the land has more value to us unencumbered,
Right, okay.
and it could be developed into early pension housing or
look, it's
other.
perfectly opposite the average person's house. If the earthquake's going to be so far out of kilter, it would be perfect for that scenario, which will bring in another budget line if it's going to be elderly person housing at the benefit. So,
We go back up.
Yep.
So the following buildings be divested. We've taken a couple out of there because they are special in different ways.
Your worship, just the Clyde Police Lot and the museum wanted those rights to move it.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. And also first rights to the Miller's Flat Bowling Club for divestment of that as well for $1.
Do they still have a bowling club?
No, they want to use it as part of their
But who would we offer it to? What committee or group?
it has to be the
Community hub.
it would have to be the community hub group.
Okay, so there's a community hub group, that's what they're called.
Yeah.
I think you're fine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, okay, so
So Balance Cottage noting the need to engage with the committee. Clyde Police Lockup noting the Clyde Museum requested first rights to the building. Briarherb Museum, Briarherb Cottage. Miller's Flat Bowling Club noting the Miller's Flat.
Miller's Flat.
Recreation or recreation?
Miller's Flat Recreation Group.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I'll get
You know
that,
who we mean.
Yeah.
yeah.
I'll get the correct
Yeah.
thing, what we put in the actual minute.
Yeah.
Roxburgh, where's the goods shed?
Those flat sport.
That should have been on that one as well.
Right.
There you go.
No, Briarherb Museum and Cottage are different. We need the goods sheds.
Recreation group.
Can I just jump in there with that one, because it's quite a problem.
Yeah.
If you put stop to investigate exact options when you come back to you,
Okay,
For
the Briar.
right.
so if you put museum and cottage, because they're both the Briarherb, and then you also put the
Stop to investigate.
goods shed
Yeah.
And
and
the post.
goods shed, and yeah, those will both have staff to investigate options because and report back.
And same for the next one.
Same for goods shed.
Isn't it this one?
Miller's Flat Bowling Club, noting the Miller's Flat Sport and Recreation Group. Did they officially want first right of refusal or may want? The Miller's Flat Bowling Club.
They've asked.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
request that.
Requested.
requested first.
Yeah.
And then scroll down a little bit and the Roxton squash courts, nobody else being desperate to have. I'm happy to move that. Someone happy to second it? Thank you, Martin. Any further discussion? All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carries.
Yes.
Number 4 agrees that the old Alexandra Riding for the Disabled old building should be demolished. Happy to move that. Martin's happy to second it. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carries. And then agrees to divest the Ranfurly Service Centre as part of the long-term plan 2027 to 37. Stu's happy to move that. Sally's happy to second it. All those, any further discussion? Does anybody know? Not happy, we know. Maybe Janice knows that she's still coming on the 1st of July. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carries. Right. Thank you. E. Agrees to, Sally's going to declare a conflict on this and not vote. Yes. Agrees to accept the Ida McDonald Roxburgh Pool White Aura to be vested in council if the offer can be confirmed by resolution from the Roxburgh Pool Committee by Monday, 26th of May, 2025. I just think it's run another way. I would put, instead of if the offer can, subject to.
Subject to
Confirmation
the Roxburgh Sport Committee confirming.
Subject to confirmation by resolution from.
Yeah. It's probably implicit, but do you need to put if not? So it's quite clear that if not, then we don't.
Yeah.
Something just to, it sounds wrong almost to say. It's already there implicit, but I think we want to embrace this approach.
No, just so subject to confirmation by resolution.
Subject to information.
And I'd put confirmation of ownership.
Vesting?
Yes, that's the word we were looking for.
Information.
Of vesting by resolution from the Roxburgh Pool Committee by Monday, 26th of May, 2025 in a special step.
Do we have to say to council? CODC?
Good idea.
Yep.
Very clear.
Confirmation to council. So my question is, do you need to put in the event this is not forthcoming? Then we don't.
Need to?
On this. Well, it's verbal method.
Yeah. Okay, cool. If confirmation is not received by the state, council will not accept.
Now, is that midnight?
Time
5 o'clock.
5 p.m.
So you realise business 5 p.m.
Close business, yeah.
Somebody's got to communicate that to that committee then.
Sounds like a job for Peter.
We should receive. So what was that last bit?
So confirmation is not received by close of business on this date. Council will not.
His own bulletproof vest down here. I was going to borrow his own.
Will not accept, yeah.
Except.
Oh, this is all there.
Transfer.
That's right.
Me and Sally
Right.
need to borrow one of his bulletproof vests.
Noting that Sally is abstaining from not participating in this vote. Somebody happy to move?
Oh,
Thank you, Neil. Seconded, thank you, Lindley. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. One. Yeah. Agrees to leave the Alexandra Pool, outdoor pool open subject to review in the 2027 and 37 long-term plans.
I think.
Agrees to retain.
Agrees to, retain the pool
Agrees to retain the pool.
and subject to a review in 27-37 long-term plan. That's, yeah, that's more about what we.
Agrees to retain the others under outdoor pool subject to, yeah, that's.
Subject.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, somebody happy to move that? Thank you, Stu and Sally.
Love swimming.
All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Against?
That's clearer.
Carried. G, agrees to give up to $1.6 million for the completion of the Manahira Valley Community Hub to be funded from Vincent General Reserves. Martin and Stu.
I might just change that to a grant,
Oh, okay,
to give a grant of up to maybe.
a grant of up to 1.6 million.
Yeah.
Yep, that was Marty and Stu. Any further discussion on that one? No, all those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. I notes that there is no offer for Central Tavern to hold a South Island Supercar event, so there is no decision required for the long-term plan 2025 to 34. I'm happy to move that. Stu's happy to second it. Any discussion?
Sorry, I'm just thinking there is a decision because you're funding it out of reserves at the moment. So you need to.
On the basis that, well, we're also on the basis that there is no offer.
Yeah.
We're not going to fund it.
Yeah.
That's the easy way. Yeah, on the basis there's no offer, because we did say we proposed to fund it. On the basis there is no offer.
Central Tavern, on the basis that there is no offer to host a South Island Supercar event. Okay, yeah.
Not, no,
Something needs to change.
Not on the basis that there is no offer, because there's no host of super game.
no
No
funding.
funding is to be provided. Yeah. Definitely, nothing else required, yeah. Thanks.
To be.
I think you put advertising. Because we just put aside, not necessarily.
Yeah.
That doesn't imply that if there were an offer, we would have approved it.
No.
Read what you want to.
We don't know that, we're in discussion.
Right, I'm happy with that minor amendment. Are you happy with the minor amendment, Stu? Thank you. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. J, requests a report from the Chief Executive Officer to investigate possible uses for the tourism reserves.
I wonder if we take that a wee bit broader and request a report from the Chief Executive Officer to investigate possible uses of council's reserves, including tourism reserves, as part of the 27-37 LTP, whether it's a broader conversation.
So that'll have to be spent within tourism.
That one.
Well, that one was specific to that 400,000, wasn't it?
Right from the
So
tourism.
actually, that probably needs to come before 2027 LTP.
Okay.
Is that going to stay within tourism though? Because it was that.
Has to.
Yeah.
Has to.
Has to.
Yeah, it's staying there. Oh,
Yeah.
Is that staying the way, it was there? Just, like if it's following on from the supercar thing.
This is the one that's exploring potentially Blossom Festival funding.
No, this.
No, I've got that further down.
Oh, you've got that further down?
Sally will be to get a report on that 400,000, what the ideas are around that.
Which may be Blossom Festival.
Yeah, or I was thinking about this out loud. What if you're talking about impact on rates, do you have a capital amount? Would you not just adjust your rate on the tourism levy
Yes, and that's one idea, that's why. I
to
think-
let it run itself into neutral? Or into, if you haven't got an issue, take the rates away now, if you take Nigel's point.
Yeah.
And reduce the tourism levy or rate now by a small percentage.
Some of that money is not coming from rates. And if we don't spend it on tourism, it can't be spent elsewhere.
Yeah, but I'm saying still use it as a reserve account, but don't then rate to keep in the future, like they take 0.5% off your tourism levy across the district until you run that account into.
That's right.
Yeah.
We can't, can we?
So,
No.
I'm not an expert on this, but the funding we've got, which means we've ended up reserved from MB, was subject to council maintaining the a certain level of funding at the time. So back in COVID, because so some regions around the country reduced their tourism take in COVID, but it was the amount you got was subject to how much your council was putting in, and that's in our EB agreement with them. So we just need to be cautious around if we are reducing budget.
So it's the funding from NB.
No, so this is
So the capital of it.
paid from ratepayers. But it was taken at the time, which we leveraged to get the EB funded. And the priority was to spend the EB funding because it had a time limitation.
Something like the swing bridge.
We could take that away to explore, because I think there is a valid point that if we continue to rate fund tourism businesses for, and we have quite a big buffer as it is currently, and if it continues to get bigger, then there's an argument to say, actually, we should be drawing that fund down and reducing the rates impact. But maybe that's a bit of it, we're going to have to do pretty quickly if we wanted to reflect that this year.
We're out of time and goes out of date for this year. So in terms of that, I don't know if we can get it in an annual plan potentially. Yeah, so maybe if we aim for that tourism work to be considered as part of the annual plan for next year.
Some considerations around. We just.
Needs to come back to us, but it's put over the end.
Any use of those funds.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, it's a credit generating interest, isn't it? So it's a net contributor to rates.
Not to rates, only
To
to funds.
the business. So it's not, it is actually offsetting debt servicing somewhere else.
Do we need to put for the 26, 27
Sharp
day?
way.
Yeah.
Cut yourself if you're that. Cut yourself. Painful.
Keep the bumbling away from you.
And then you try to keep.
Didn't have to carry it, which is
Together,
Right, request the report from the Chief Executive Officer to investigate possible uses for the tourism reserves for the 2026 to 27 annual plan. Somebody happy to move that? Thanks, Sarah. Second, thank you, Lindley. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Okay. Agrees to support the artificial turf at Maniatoto Area School with a grant for $200,000 in the 26-27 financial year, with the money to be rate funded.
I'll move that.
Stu and Lindley, any further discussion on that? Just clarify that.
We do have money in the financial reserves contribution that will cover that in year two, if you didn't want to rate fund it.
Oh, now we're back to the conversation about spending reserves.
If you want to talk about spending reserves, then I'm happy.
So from the mini total from Vincent, from council.
Oh,
Yeah.
just.
Yeah, just.
See that, isn't it?
Oh, see you in one.
Once you spend your financial reserve contributions this year, you will no longer be gathering financial reserve contributions from
The district.
the district, because we changed to development contributions instead, which operates under a different funding mechanism.
So they are going to have to be spent.
So effectively, we'll use up all our reserves by supporting this if it gets drawn down. If not, they'll stay in reserves and have to get rid of some out anyway. And if, once that's done, then we go into the general pot of the new system, where we use development contributions across the district funding the other avenues in,
So with the money to be funded from the Maniatoto Financial Reserve?
That sounds
What is it?
weird, doesn't
What
it?
is it?
Specifically the
Financial Contributions Reserve?
contributions.
From the Maniatoto Financial Contributions Reserve.
Is that
I bet you
the
will.
reserves contribution fund?
Does that have a problem with it?
yes, it do. I was always down there. We didn't mention.
Yeah, which that makes good sense. It's logical. That's what you can use it on. As long as, yeah.
Management contributions reserves.
No, what's the title of the fund, please, Donna? I thought it was financial contributions reserve.
Once again, a small community using all the resources to fund themselves or the big bird flies around the outside. I'm bringing on today of discussions.
I didn't bring my Bible.
Hang on, I may take one of your chronicles at a time. Sorry.
Same board gave money to your bloody wife, didn't they?
So have we Manu Toto financial contributions reserve?
So the specific account that it sits in is actually called the Reserves Contributions Fund Many Toto.
Right, thank you.
That's what you'll see in your quarterly financial report.
Right, Stu and Lindley, are you happy with that minor amendment to where it's coming from? Wonderful, thank you.
And so the good thing is that actually the year 2 doesn't have an impact on rates.
That's right.
Now, did you go on to say after that with the change in reserves contributions going forward, that's not going to happen? Because I'm not aware that we've changed our district plan.
So we are now collecting development contributions and the updated development contribution, financial contributions policy is much of the south.
I'm only just asking that question because the reserves contributions are taken under the district plan.
They can also be taken under the DC policy, which is now, I believe, all wrapped up into one.
So somehow we've changed the provision in our district plan, so what I'm worried about is that the district plan says that we're now not going to use that provision anymore.
Yeah, we can choose, so we have to.
Right, so at long last, the word may is being used.
Right,
So, yeah.
so agrees to, all those in favour? Aye. Against, carries. Right, Al agrees to support the artificial turf at Dunstan High School with a grant for $300,000 in the 25-26 financial year, with the money to be taken, sounds mean, to come from the Vincent General Reserve.
Coming from
Martin and Lindley, thank you. I need to, excuse me, there's no line, there's nothing in the post to them. Everything's good. No, who's that? So Rick Martin, seconded Lindley, all those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Right. M agrees to continue investigating a joint council controlled organisation model for water services delivery. Happy to move that? Someone happy to second that? Thank you, Neil. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carries.
Surely this one's going.
That's all right. Well,
So that's why I crossed that little bit out, but you can.
That's totally fine. We'll come up with a plan. So, this was our discussion around mining royalties coming out of the Teviot Valley. Is it just Auckland?
It's
Yeah. Right. Agrees that the income received from mining agreements is allocated to.
I don't think you need brackets for this one because it's quite specific to then.
Yeah.
So just
Mining agreements with
mining. Okay.
Yeah. And I think you could put allocated as follows, and then we can put an amount in.
Yeah.
And it would be 120,000 to the emergency. What's the emergency fund? The first one that was going to have 120,000 going in it.
The numbers are, if I remember correctly, we're going to put 165,000
into the emergency roading.
Emergency roading, and 120,000 into the emergency event.
Yeah.
And then an extra 100,000 in rates into the emergency roading.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's down the bottom there. So let me just fix this.
Okay, so you get 150.
That was to there.
So the total from the mine royalties is not there, other than just added to it.
Only 65.
265 is the total.
260.
That's what we're budgeting.
Yeah,
Yeah, hang on, just, match.
so we'll do this in two separate parts.
Yeah.
So the first part relates to the money that's coming in from the mining royalty and is allocated as 165k to the Road and Emergency Works Fund, 120k to the Emergency Event Fund. Do we need to put per annum?
Yep.
And does it need to be subject to the royalties received, or what happens if they go down?
If they go down, then the council will need to make a decision on which one it prioritises. It might turn around and say, based on the budget. Well, we could, we're talking about a budget right now, so you're talking about how you want to allocate your budget. If something happens that the price goes down or the gold isn't mined, there's not as much there, you would then need to make a decision during the year, because we would turn around and say, we've only got X, which one do you want to prioritise? So I think we're on safe ground to say that per annum, because that's what we budgeted, not what we actually, that's what we hope will happen, not what may happen.
It is predicated on income received, not income anticipated. So,
But do we say per annum?
say per annum.
Is that over the 9 years or just?
No, per annum is each year.
I thought we were just doing it for 1 year and deciding next time, did I miss that?
Yeah, possibly.
Sorry, the problem with that is that we're doing a 9-year budget, so I need to understand what you're going to do in year 2, 3, 4, 5. By putting per annum, that doesn't limit the council during its annual plan process to redirect the funding where it wants to.
Right. Somebody happy to move those. Thank you, Martin. Seconded. Thank you, Cheryl. All those in favour? Aye. Against?
Yeah.
Stu, you want it noted, Stu?
Yeah.
Carried. Agrees that, and it's not a further because we've already consulted on 165. So I would imagine that agrees that 100,000 per annum. Do we need to say of the 165 consulted on? I don't want people to think that we've put an extra 100,000 in because we haven't. We've actually dropped it, but.
In the scale of things, why don't we just put the 65,000, do the figure we consulted on?
Well, we can.
Because everyone has got to buy into the emergency fund across the district. Consulted on it for the purpose of what it was for, emergency roadworks. Whether it be an earthquake, or whether it be flooding, or whether it be anything else.
Because you've got a peak rates here this year, but an estimated rate percentage is going to go down in the following years, so you keep careful this year and you can put more next year.
That's just kicking the can down the road.
That's not.
Well, if you're going to do that, though, you need to actually, this resolution has to apply to the LTP. So if you're going to do that, you're going to have 100k this year and 165, or is that already by default done?
Well, what you could do, because the 165 is already in there.
Yeah.
What you could turn around and say is that the agrees due to above, that it reduces its rates input to $100,000 down from 165,000
for year one.
For year one.
And then year two stays at 165.
Then you can leave year two at 165. That's right. Can we build it?
Right, so if we put, agrees that subject to. Number O, what do we call it? Item O.
Resolution.
Resolution O, that's the one. Resolution O. Above the rates contribution
Yes.
be reduced.
Yeah.
From 165.
Well, it's people in the year, the subsidising that. It's not the true reflection of the rating infrastructure.
For the. For financial year 20.
Have we agreed that we're not, have we had a decision that we're not going to do the 165?
No, we're going to do that now. This is the proposed. If you don't agree, you can vote against it. If the resolution fails, we'll look at a different option. So he now reads, agrees that subject to resolution O above, the rates contribution be reduced from 165,000 to 100,000 for the 25-26 financial year for the Roading Emergency Works Fund. Somebody happy to move that?
I am.
Thank you, Nigel. Seconded. Thank you, Ian. All those further comment? I look like you're going to say something, Saskia. No?
No. Second thought about it.
No.
Another resolution.
Perfect. All those in favour?
Right.
Aye. Against?
All right. And next one too.
Yeah.
Carried.
Thank you.
Q agrees that the Blossom Festival be a line item for 24,500. Are you going to abstain in this matter? Is that what you said? Okay. Agrees that the Blossom Festival be a line item for $24,500 for the 25-26 financial year and 26-27 financial year to be funded from the district tourism reserves.
Okay. Can I just get a clarification from councillors? When we put the museum funding collectively as a profit at council level, we took the corresponding amounts away from the grants. Was it the intention of council to take, because this is currently VCB's promotional rate, did you want to lower that, or was it your intention just to keep that as it is and take this 24,500 from tourism?
I think it was the intention to keep that as is and anticipating that the 24,500 will come out of the 400,000 tourism reserves.
Thank you.
I'll abstain from this.
Thank you, Martin. Somebody happy to move that? Was that your, did you put your hand up before? Moved, Sally?
Yep.
Seconded, Ian, thank you. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carries. We didn't really discuss this one.
No.
No. Request the
Get
chief
rid.
executive officer to bring a paper to council to investigate the feasibility of a district event fund.
I'll move.
Okay, Martin's moved it. Does somebody want to second it? Then we can talk about it. Lovely. Right, discussion. Because we
So-
didn't really talk about this before, I don't think.
So is taking maybe a surplus from your tourism side is MB driven for economic development and tourism and everything else. A majority of the, if I'm right, feasibility and district fund events could well be lots of a cavalcade, lots of a motorsport park, lots of the crank works, lots of a.
So the wheels at Cromwell.
Yeah. And I guess if that 373,682 dollars is tagged for that, would it and could it be used as a startup or a funding mechanism to allow small enterprises to start up? E.g., I know that it used to be the cavalcade had a float of about $60,000 that when you town took over the cavalcade, the float went with the committee. So then at the end of their profit sharing, they gave back the float and they kept 10%. So like, a bit like the gentleman that spoke at the hearings the other day, is there an appetite for us to look at that with attached to that funding we've got in credit?
Well, that would be part of that piece of work. And I guess that has come about because a couple of times now, so including Frank Works, including the supercars, including the potential of picking up a wheels at Cromwell or whatever. When an opportunity comes, we don't currently have any mechanism to fund it. Do we want to think about whether we want to have a mechanism? And it would just be Peter bringing a paper back to talk about what that might look like.
And at the moment, just if I just go back up to that resolution. And so this is not specifically from the tourism events fund. This is potentially a new fund because it's not tagged to it. So it's broader than that. It could well be,
I guess.
unless you want to be specific in the intent on that resolution.
No, but the perfect, there's just about a perfect crossover and a surplus sort of what we've got in the tourism. It's been derived with help from MD about business innovation and tourism that could leave it side by side, so it's enough.
Does it have to just be specific to an event fund though, that those reserves in tourism? Because I mean, there could be.
No, they don't, and that's what Peter was saying, it's not necessarily about those reserves, it might be
Okay.
about a separate.
Okay.
So what I'd say to myself is if you end up funding an event reserve, which can only come from rates, I assume.
Well, could come from gold.
Then once you've created a fund, you know it's automatically going to be spent. So you just, if you were to hit with such a proposal, you're already saying we're going to either from rates or outside other revenue, doesn't really matter. It's all just ratepayers' money at the end of the day. You're going to create a fund that will automatically, once it's sitting there, find out to be spent. And once you got a sum of money set apart for sort of this that kind of generic type of use, it'll get spent willy-nilly. I struggle in times like these to, and I know it's only a feasibility study, so a long way from feasibility. But just the gypsies warning really, once you create funds like that, all you're doing is creating more money to be spent.
Well, and we already have our grants pots.
Sorry.
We already have our grants pots and our community and events fund that we have. Does it need to be a separate thing, or does it come back as part of our policies that we already have? That will be up to you.
Well, I'd be in favour of it being a separate thing, because I think going down the line of what we're looking at down the future, the next 20 years, they are the things that will fund a lot of the other stuff we're going to have to grants by. Because by nature, the nature of the business, it'll get tied up in bureaucracy, it'll get filtered away in policy. And we're just seeing now, all of a sudden, this leads to the next thing, all our surplus in our grants accounts, the mini Otato to Vincent are funding the facilities in their area, so the rest of the council get away. The first regional party to take the turf for Ranfurly was going to be across the district because mini Otato wasn't getting a lot of those district sport field stuff. So now all of a sudden, it's letting that stuff go.
Is this a bigger piece of work in terms of we've got to think about how reserves are going to be spent, how things are rated for across the district, how events might be, is that actually not a separate item? Is that a bigger piece of?
Well, I mean, that as you've just described it, that could be sort of work that we do in the next 2 years that we bring to the 27, 37, that could be.
Special, and once it's through this, to do it, we haven't done a rating review in a long time. And there is, I think it's 50,000 in the budget to a fundamental rating review, which we would like the district-wide funding, we would bring that through council for the LTP. So that would be in the next financial year, how those went between sort of January to sort of June next year. So you agree how you want that to look, and then we go into LTP. So I agree. I think it is a bigger conversation around use of all reserves, how we're going to rate into the future, especially once that decision on water is known. You know, what the future of, you know, what this council wants to focus on, how you want to use reserves.
So would that say request the chief executive consider the feasibility of a district event fund in the wider context of a full rating review?
And does that include our grant system as well?
Yeah. Would you be happy with that, Martin and Lindley?
Right.
So request the chief executive. And I don't know if you put investigate or consider.
Yeah, well, investigate.
Consider the feasibility of a district event fund in the wider context of a full
ratings review.
The problem is that as we go for digitalisation, as the water reserve funds
in the wider ratings review,
you've now got the system of our grant system is really part of what should be a feasibility study. So the word grant be in there somewhere.
I think it needs to be all in together as part of that wider ratings review, and I think that kind of captures.
It does, because the ratings review will, you know, how does rates get applied? grants are one way that, you know, so it captures it.
Right, on that basis, all those in favour? Against? Carries. And then the final one was around the central stories, request the chief executive officer to bring a paper to council and to investigate operating models for central stories. We talked about it being a lot wider than that, didn't we? Because we're not just talking about central stories, we're talking about how central stories ties in with the museum trust and the heritage trust and the operating model for Cromwell. Do we need to have a resolution in there, or do you believe that work is
It's been done.
being undertaken as part of the wider?
I believe the resolutions would be helpful,
Yeah.
in terms of stipulating your expectations, around it being a full review of essentially the funding we provide to the heritage and museum sector. And you can put including, central stories, and trust funding or something like that. But I think that's really setting your expectations that we want a full review, a wide review.
So it requests the chief executive officer to bring a paper to council with a full review. Of funding current of operating models and funding functions for the heritage and museum sector.
And the use of community space.
And the use of community space. I appreciate it. It's quite a lot to fit in one. But I think those all tie in together. Full review of operating models, funding and the use of community space for the museum and heritage sector.
Get a couple of weeks for that.
Left.
And with the arts trust come to that.
I would, and is this plan? Do we need to say funding heritage and arts?
Yeah,
Okay, cool.
That's your intention to include all that, yes, we make that up.
So the museum, well, they kind of tie together.
They do.
Lots of them wear multiple hats.
Most of where we're 2 years from an LTP, scary thought as it is,
Yeah.
we probably want to do that next financial year then.
Yeah.
Inform
Yeah,
that.
it's must have been out the ways, acting community business basis. In terms of that, let's get kick off pretty soon.
Peter, you're right, you don't want to do that next, you want it for the year one of the.
That's right, so we need to start that.
But it's got to tie in with what's happening at Cromwell's operating model as well, so it really needs to run alongside that process.
Yes.
Yeah. So.
I was gonna say, yeah.
Okay.
You want to move?
I would like to move for that one. Would you like to move? Thank you, Martin, and seconded, thank you, Ian. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried.
Just on discussion now that we've done that. If we've taken, I'll go back to the meeting photos. It's always thought where we didn't have any funds, so that came up at our community board meeting where we're doing our general reserves. And we probably weren't. And the same as the Vince. There's 400,000 of the small communities to offset the rates of others. Should we not relook at some of our halls if the savings we've had there? Because we've went to the halls first before we found out we had the money. The rate savings we've made on the 400,000 we've picked up out of general reserves. Out of not so much in the Integral, the gold money out of Integral. I never knew we had royalties out of gold. Has offset the rest of the council's increase in rates and directly, well, in our situation, disadvantage our community schools.
Well, I think it's also a case to be made for the fact that we've gone through each of those facilities individually and made a decision that has been passed as a resolution based on the merits of each facility. And I would be really worried about us getting to the point where we've said, oh, well, we've saved 0.5% or 0.75%, so let's quickly spend it by putting more in. I don't know that that's where we want to get to.
But, well, I guess the discussion, especially with some of the ones in Wipeout and Patty and Weatherby, the discussion would be different for the people who have paid the reserves rates and paid the rates for the last 50 or 100 years. We'll turn around and go, well, this doesn't seem fair. But they're up for discussion, and I get that. So what if they turn around and volunteer said, we'd like them to go back to council? Because the appetite for 200 and 400,000 is not there, which is 1% of the rates. That's come out of grants funding, which before in the budget was put into the total number. So effectively, the 0.5% has come out of two community fund rates, little and before you take the gold mining money.
I don't think those conversations with those communities are going to happen in the next 3 months whereby they come to
No,
a
no,
decision. So I guess if you spent the next 12 months having those those discussions with the communities for those 3 halls specifically, where we've said investigate divestment options, speaking to the communities, if the result was they were all coming back in at the next
Yeah, I mean, I guess
year
the
or whatever it
200,000,
be.
the 300,000 on the shore, we didn't have any reserves and went to the community board meeting because can we do it out of reserves? And obviously that was districtalised funding, meant that the reserves had to be spent. So it's good to do that. But that's offset for the rest of the ratepayer base in the district. For the cost of those other facilities.
If you used your logic, every time you save some money, you'd say, let's put something back in, you'd spend it. So, which,
Yeah, and I guess what I'm trying to do in my head is that we have an equitable system where the small communities aren't subsidising those other things. If the community wishes to have them, it's an equitable way of funding. That's all I'm saying.
but the reality is that in year 1, starting 1 July this year, the Wedderburn Hall is still going to be liable for rates.
Yep.
And guess what? Who's paying them?
The ratepayer.
No,
No.
the council's going to have to. They just still own the building.
Yeah.
So actually, I think what you've really highlighted to me is there's probably some residual costs that we've got for those ones that we've said have a conversation that need to be included because the rates are still going to be rateable and different things like that.
Still
Still going to cost us some money because you're not going to get it all done by.
But everything. What I'm saying is the reserves that have been spent by ratepayers in the past, which haven't been spent, are now subsidising those rates now.
We can't take a course.
It just comes back to fiscalisation.
And then
It doesn't matter which way you do it. You, at a point in time, you pick, go from ward rating to district rating for this particular activity. And there are going to be those kind of bumps in the road and et cetera, like ward reserves. And there's just no way around it. It's just what happens. And it's swings and roundabouts. You look at road in 3 waters and say, well, we started trying to second guess who benefits where and according to geography and size of the population, you drive yourself nuts.
On that basis, we're going to take a quick break and then come back. We have a number of other resolutions to pass for all the fun documents at the end that loads of people read. But we'll take 10 minutes. So if we come back 25 past and we'll be ready for the next part. Thank you. All right, rejoining everybody. Thank you very much.
Sure, that's not your seat.
We have just got a couple of resolutions to get through for the last part of today.
Okey dokey, thank you, councillors, it's been a very long day. So we've got a few submissions, as Madam Chair said, relating to the actual book, a late staff submission, and also the policies and strategy. So that was the original pen in your paper. We do need to formally consult on 3 policies and the fees and charges. So I just run us through them to remind you. So that was the significance and engagement policy, the development and financial contributions policy, the revenue and financing policy, and the fees and charges. So within the feedback, there were comments on these, not papers to be fair, but there were different comments. We heard from an oral submit also around the development contributions as well. So now really is the time for you guys to consider, based on that feedback, the submissions, if you want any changes to those 4 documents on the basis of the submitters feedback, and we'll take the staff submission as a separate item.
I can make an observation.
Yeah.
The development and financial contributions policy, you just about need to be a rocket scientist, say to understand it. I feel kind of lucky that I can remember when it was first done, unfortunately. So I get the guts of it, but I have had feedback that says it is so hard to work out, and I can only agree. And that's not a reflection of anything bad by us. It's a complex matter, full stop. But just to note that and say if there's any way somehow to simplify it and make it simple, or find the here goes the cheat sheet to it type thing. Because I've tried to read through it and I found what I wanted to find, so I'm happy with what it's got. But it is a very complex document, and people that work with it all the time probably find the same issue. But
we certainly haven't had pushback from other centres and who are proposing similar percentage increases, like when you look at Dunedin, where some developers have thrown the toys out on this. I was expecting a lot more pushback.
well, the reality is, if developers think that they shouldn't pay, then that only means that the other ratepayers pay.
Yeah.
And I think that my view of our development and financial contributions policy, that it's been developed in such a way that it seems to be fair and equitable. And while a developer might not be happy about it all, if they don't pay it, that means that existing ratepayers do, and for what benefit? They've already paid their way into the system.
And remembering, 2 years' time, building levies.
Yeah.
And the development policies as we know, DC policies will be gone as we know.
I think these things recent, because it is actually really complicated, even just doing the calculations as the outs.
The maths
and cost.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Special brain.
And it's so necessary that the development community do pay for the growth. It's not the rest of us. And, I have no qualms with it, but I agree with what Neil says. It's a very complicated thing to understand.
You think the change will make it easier in the future?
Well, I think they'll make it easier around the I don't really understand how they're going to change it. I suspect it's going to lean on the landowner rather than the developer. Some parts will pay back over a period of time. I know that's what's been happening.
That was the things like.
Yeah. I think government's very aware, and the things that have been to around we've done well, but in fact, DIA said growth is the silent killer for the councils that had growth, because the cost implications on the infrastructure in those councils is really significant. So governments are more aware that growth infrastructure costs are really high, and it's hard to calculate things out to understand what the development community should pay, because it's never a straight. It's very rarely as a project solely for the purposes of growth. It's got a bit of a renewal component to it, and it's got a bit of a improving the service for communities, and it's not precisely the same.
Right,
Sorry, you probably should have said this, we've got the high level summary of the themes received for those policies, it's page 35 of your agenda. So the development profession ones that Julie has, talked to, has covered that. There were some concerns around council transparency and engagement. I don't know if that is a policy issue per se, or more the way we do things, and that might be something to think about the next training, but that did come out a bit related to the revenue and financing policy, and come through strongly in submissions was concern in general around spending, which I know you guys have thought a lot about. And the fees and charges, the main thing that come through there was some comments around the waste management. We were concerns and suggestions really related to waste disposal charges, recycling services and green waste disposal, not heaps of other than the next charges. So sorry, I shouldn't have contributed to the summary, it's late in the day. So yeah, so not in terms of compared to the other consultation items, not huge numbers of particular submissions in relation to these policies.
And interestingly, yeah, not a lot of feedback on the fees and charges, which of course we have been moving towards a, user pays for lots of those aspects of council delivery. Comments? Questions? How do people feel about those? Were there any changes that you wanted to make to any of those 4 documents?
I don't actually know what document I'm in, I just know what page number I'm on, which is page 370 of the agenda, and it's swimming pool charge, and it says the swimming pool's charge is applied to operations and maintenance of the community swimming pools, Alexandra, Cromwell, Ranfurly, Roxburgh and Millers Flat, but I don't think that is correct because Roxburgh and Millers Flat get a grant. It's not rated the same way that Ranfurly, Alex and Cromwell is. And I just wasn't sure if that was correct. Page 370.
Yeah. It's not a foundation charge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with what we're proposing, just Miller's Flat, that'll come out of there, isn't it?
They're both just currently grants, so that word just comes out.
On 1 July, it's not.
Swimming pools charge, yeah, that's the targeted rate.
Yeah.
Targeted rates based on a uniform charge for each rating unit is shown. And it's talking about applied to operations and management.
This 1 July could change, but
Well, it's going to change. We've resolved it is going to change. So this fees and charges schedule will just have to drop off Miller's Flat.
Yeah.
Although Millers Flat still will be paying because they're part of the TV award, but the Millers Flat pool's not. Yeah, Millers Flat pool's not.
Yeah.
That's correct. That should come out.
Yeah.
And the next page down, page 371, there's no figures against the TV at Valley Ward.
Talking about grants.
This is grants here. Is there no grants from the TV?
So, there was a council or community board resolutions, which is, that said that they would be
Using reserves.
Reserves.
Okay, gotcha. That makes
That will
sense.
be both zero.
Okay, that's why it's zero. Yeah.
Brilliant. Sally?
Sorry, just one thing you just said then just struck a chord. So as a result of the resolution we've made about the pool in Roxburgh, and assuming that comes to fruition, the people in Miller's Flat will be paying a district-wide rate for pools and operating their own pool.
They get a grant.
But
they get
they're operating their own pool.
Yeah.
They still get that grant.
Yeah.
Now they're paying to be part of everybody else's pools, and they will probably be not happy. That's all right. Go.
People who are not that happy.
Yeah, get that.
Right. On that then, would you want to put up M?
Yeah. Are you looking to take out that Roxburgh and Millers Flat out of the text?
That's just minor editorial though, we can take care of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that bottom resolution where Peter and I can do any minor editorial?
Okay. So it's the T.
Cool.
C, notes the submissions received on policies consulted on and adopts the policies as written in the agenda.
Subject to the minor.
Subject to minor editorial amendments. Martin's happy to move those. Cheryl's happy to second it.
Okay.
All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. And then the new TQ.
So this one relates to the staff submission. So for this item, you need to accept that you're going to consider a late submission as part of the process. And Louise can answer this one. So this is related to the fast track approvals bill. And in the legislation, councils can recover costs. We had some recent legal advice where we were told to be very prudent for us to reflect that in our fees and charges. So Louise and the team have written a submission that basically to amend fees and charges so that we can cost recover. So that is the staff submission.
Yep. Let's do the you accept this, that's you accept the stuff submission and then. Which is what I read for me. There'll need to be some discussion on the actual submission.
What page is that submission on, please? Do you know?
That's the actual
The actual submission?
Val?
Page 35, late staff submission fast track approvals act 2024.
It's my summary of it.
I can tell you.
Thank you. 6 through to 37 maybe.
Yeah, right.
So, the submission is that all costs incurred by council consulting and providing assistance before the application is lodged will be recovered on a time charge / hourly rate. And that all costs incurred by council in undertaking all functions under the Fast Track Act 2024, where the substantive application is lodged, will be recovered on a time charge / hourly rate.
Plus 10%.
Plus 10%. User pays. And some of these are going to have significant implications for us. If you're a mum and dad developer putting in a private one, you would have to pay fees. Stu, you got a question?
I'm just practically saying just about the rating examples on page 375.
Should we finish this one first then? So, where are we at?
If I could just comment, that the Act provides us the ability to recover actual and reasonable costs through the process. So prior to lodgement, it's from the applicant, and after lodgement, it's from the Environmental Protection Authority. So this is reflecting exactly what's coming in. So with legal engagement consultants or internal staff, we can recover that.
Yeah. Wayne will put that up and then have a look.
It's freedom.
Approves the receipt of the following late submission for consideration as part of the long-term plan. Staff submission on the Fast Track Approvals Act. Agrees to, in addition to the fees and charges, 25-26 Fast Track charges applications for consent under the Fast Track Act 2024. So there's supposed to be a hyphen or something in between Fast Track charges. No, sorry, charge between charges and applications, because it's not.
All costs incurred by council consulting and providing assistance before the application is lodged. We will cover them. Right. Are people happy to?
Does that seem right, Wood?
And what is the sanction if somebody doesn't pay?
Well, I guess that's what the sanction is. Every time somebody doesn't pay council, eventually it would end up with a bit to cover it.
Yes, it is. Yes.
But under fast track, what I'm really asking is under fast track process, council hasn't got the sanction for withholding consents or.
No, but that's what Louise is saying, is that it's part of the process now that councils can recover the bills. Once we've issued a bill to a debtor, they get paid.
It's to the, then the bill goes to the EPA.
Yeah.
So we're dealing with we're not dealing with Joe, the applicant, we're dealing with the EPA. The environment.
Okay, sorry, I didn't realise.
And I suppose they could default.
Fair and reasonable action and reasonable profit isn't defined. So we just have to hope that while we're acting reasonably, that we can recover it from the EPA.
Right. Happy to move that? Someone happy to second it?
Both.
Both of them? Yeah. So I thought that was part, so yeah, you and Lee.
Yeah.
Martin was happy to second that. So Sally? No. All those in favour? Against? Carries.
It was me.
Martin.
Martin.
I moved.
Been a long day.
Yeah, needed more biscuits at afternoon. Right, we missed one, which was N, considers other ideas and feedback on the submissions and decides what action should be taken, which is what Neil was talking about before.
Ah, that's all what's yeah.
So it'll now become, what did it become?
The W.
W.
And think about that.
Considers other ideas and feedback in the submissions and decides what action should be taken. There were a number of staff comments alongside some of the submissions. And I guess it's the process for how we acknowledge that that's been received, what action will be taken on it, and communicate that back to the submitters. Thoughts on that?
So typically what we do is in the letters after adopting the LTP, we have responded back to all our submitters, and the previous mayor would personalise those, and that's where we use the staff comments. That was very, very intensive. So I think what staff need to do is go through them, and if there's any in particular where, say, it was not CODC, they needed to go to ORC, we'll make sure when we go through them that we have pointed the people in the right direction. And Madam Chair, I do recommend the sheer number of submissions that maybe when we go back and tell the community the final outcome post 30 June, that it might be a more generic response from you. You might be otherwise weeks writing letters.
I was going to do an individual door visit.
But I think the staff undertake just to go through and check that those other ideas have been appropriately acknowledged. We did hear a couple of gems that they felt that the areas have been well covered, but we can do that as part of the process.
I think that resolution should reflect that that's the submissions made in Appendix 6. That's where they all are. Is that the right one? In the right place?
Appendix 6, yes, you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the resolution needs to say that we accept and note them and accept the response provided in the staff comments.
Yep. So
is that right? Yep.
Accepts and acknowledges.
Oops. Wayne.
Oh, should have almost deleted it.
Don't do that, Wayne. Don't save it now.
Okay, so
We can leave that. Notes the submissions made, and do you want to accept them? Accepts and notes? Just notes?
No, I think
accepts. Receives and notes the submissions made in Appendix 6 on other matters not specifically consulted on the long-term plan, and endorses the staff responses.
Yes. Endorse. Good word.
To these submitters.
When you say enforces.
No, I just had a theme.
To their submitters.
Okay.
Right.
I think that's probably the key thing is that, we were criticised by some people about saying you're only consulting on certain things. So we've asked for people to tell us what they think about other things,
Yeah.
quite right, and they have, and there's a long list of them.
Yeah.
And like all the submissions that were made, the staff have made their comments, and what we've done is that we've gone through in the pre-reading of 5,102 pages. And what we're saying is that, hey, we note them, thank you, and we endorse what the staff has said.
Yeah. And some of them have been things where,
Yeah.
you know, they've made a suggestion and we've been able to go back and say, yes, that is happening and here is the timeframe, or, yeah. So I think it's important that people can anticipate a reply from us with the outcome of today and then also the outcome of anything else that they raised. Stu?
Question is, George, in the end here, just when we look at the rating examples on that 297, this page. The average for the hotels in Alexandria, Roxburgh, Bannockburn, Ranfurly and Cromwell was 6.8% lake rise, and the rural hotels in the Miatana, which are only 3 of them, was 25%. What do I tell them?
Well, part of that is because, and I'll jump in here, is when we pause 50% of the depreciation on the water assets, it's only those people who are on the reticulation get the benefit of that. So everyone in the urban areas got the windfall of that saving. But those in rural communities and all that sort of stuff, myself included, we don't get that benefit because we're not on the reticulated system. So that was a big saving across the network.
So when we chose to depreciate it by 50%.
Yeah, that saving that flowed from that's flowed through to the ratepayers who are on the reticulated networks, not to all the district. Because all the, you know, I'm on board. So I don't get that.
Well, you're not a part of the water.
I know, but what that meant was, and I've seen this play out in other councils before, when you exactly do that thing, the savings will accrue to those who pay, because it's user pays on our water, it's the urban dwellers. Just like last year, because the cost of our rates was rubbish, water, and that directly impacted all those people in the urban areas. That's why they were on 25%, and rural low rate increase, rates increase.
Even the large rural farms are paying the cost of the depreciation decision.
No, the benefit of the depreciation falls on the users of it. Because it's a service that's provided to the doorstep, isn't it, for water? And so that saving we made, urban dwellers got the benefit of that saving.
That saving offset the increase in other places effectively.
Yeah.
But we also paid big time last year.
Yeah.
Yeah, so swings and roundabouts, I think someone said earlier on today.
Yeah.
So that is one of the reasons why.
Which might be a tough sell.
Been out there already.
That's the challenge. Last year, our urban ratepayers got hammered and rural were under, for the most part, under 10%. Martin?
You need to move on.
Thank you. We were coming back to that.
He's just getting sidetracked.
Yeah, Martin's moved. W. As someone who can second that, thank you, Sally. All those in favour? Thank you. Carried.
So hopefully I've got the right order for the next one now, because, so we had a conversation that we wanted to go about our rating remissions policy. Nothing was resolved at the time, was staff to go away and have a look at it, but we felt when we went to have a look at it, we didn't quite have the clear direction, so I have got the page numbers. So the pages in particular where the remissions start is 377 of the agenda. And you might recall, if we cast our minds back, this was particularly around the remission of financial hardship. What we would appreciate today is some clarity on what you would done with the remission. And then we will bring that back to you as part of the final documentation.
Remember, we talked about the challenge of asking Paul and Saskia to make decisions about who constituted financial hardship. Because, which I think is A, not fair, and B, not reasonable for the ratepayers. And there was a discussion last time when we did have one, we've had, I think, just the one application in the time over this. And we made that under the policy that we currently have, but there was some discussion about whether or not that policy was fit for purpose and whether, given the large amount of benefit that has come from uplift in value of property here, whether that should be only available as a postponement and tagged to the property, or whether we wanted to retain a remission, which is you don't have to pay your rates for this year.
No, I mean, in my view, it's, the answer is quite simple, that there shouldn't be remissions if people are unable to pay, then that is attached to the asset, to the title, and it is paid for either by the ratepayer at a future date or by when the property is sold, it becomes a charge against the property. And I think that is fair and equitable, because it actually helps people who may be asset rich by being a ratepayer and may have cash problems. The debt is still theirs, and we're given the ability to postpone the payment. Eventually, it does come back to council, and I just can't remember under that regime whether interest is charged, but I suspect it is. But maybe at a nominal rate rather than a punitive rate.
Yes, I was remiss to say on page 378 of your agenda, the postponement of rates policy is still there, which would capture the instances where someone had a situation where that they couldn't, for whatever reason, pay it this year, that we attach it to the title as Nigel is referring to. The one that is the complete waiver is the one on 380.
Yes, I just want to add, under the Local Government Rating Act, 2002, Section 85 deals with the remission of rates. And that's effectively at the discretion of the council. Section 87 of the same act deals with postponement of the requirement to pay rates. And that's a must postpone. So if someone applies, you must postpone the rates. If someone applies under the remissions policy, you may pay. So there's a difference there. That it's subtle, but if someone applies under postponement, then you have no choice in it. You must postpone those rates. So I wonder whether it's because it is. There will be situations where it will be extreme financial hardship. I guess the other side of that is determining what level that sits at, and that was part of the problem we had. There could be a need for a remissions policy that probably would not be used very often, whereas the postponement, as you've suggested, would be the more usual tool we would use. So if someone applied or said, I can't pay my rates, we would usually direct them to the postponement space. And that wouldn't become any difficult because it's got it done. Whereas if someone says, they're so financially destitute, for want of better words, there could be a case for having a remission policy. But if you made that come back to council, then that's a decision that the council makes, not staff.
So is that because we thought that maybe there was a problem with having this as policy and that was the problem we needed to solve? But are you saying that actually there may be some merit in retaining it, but having that decision come to council instead of coming to you? So it's just a tweak to the policy as opposed to a full deletion or rewrite?
Yeah, and I think as Paul has said, as part of that, we actually decide maybe some criteria, begin at the term that you would, so you've got a bit of a benchmark if you get there. And as Paul said, we could do that up in a policy for you and bring that up to council if you're of a mind to take that.
So if you look at the postponement side, New Zealand don't encourage that either, but there's a facility that should be offered. Does that mean you actually set a rate of interest on the debt owing to make it unattractive to use that.
And I think that really does depend on person's circumstances, and in cases that was brought to you in that decision, to apply, if we had gone the postponement avenue, we would have been recommending probably not to put the interest on. So I think that is a tool that, council, I don't know if the legislation bars us from having discretion there. But that might be more on a case by case basis, because when we have people that come to us that are struggling, the first thing we do is try and work through a payment plan with them. We're getting to last resort with what we're talking with you now. And they are unusual extreme cases that would be postponed for.
So you're
I guess if you're saying that there's a merit to having a policy for an unusual and extreme case that doesn't fit under the other criteria, well then yes, it probably makes sense for us to keep the policy that we've got with some minor amendments that mean the decision making comes back to this table rather than putting it on staff.
I'd be, Paul and I would feel much more comfortable in those extreme cases that it was a decision by this table and not for one of we had to go and
And certainly, I'm just saying the full postponement policy was really the last resort. You go to great lengths to
yeah.
try
Well, postponement is the second to last resort, because postponement, you have to accept it and it registers against the title. And you need to have a plan in place as to when that gets repaid. The absolute last resort, prior to a no answer, which could lead to a rating sale, because at the end of the day, we're talking about someone who can't pay their rates. The absolute last resort from a policy perspective is a remission, in which we are forgiving them for their, not all of their rates. They still have to pay the water rates and they still have to pay the waste component. It's the general pipe rates and what was the water rate. So those types of rates get remitted. So it's not everything. So, and in my time in local government, barring COVID, COVID was a separate situation. I've only ever dealt with one remission case, and it was here, to be fair. And that was an extreme. I've not seen anything that big.
So
sorry.
I was going to say, is it as simple as just simply taking the delegation from staff and come to council? That simple.
So can you put that up, Wayne, and we'll go decides, retains the remissions policy, retains the rates remissions policy and the postponement of rates policy subject to
any remissions requiring council approved.
remissions,
Requiring.
subject to an amendment.
We don't even deal with remission.
Financial
Remissions.
Okay, so rates remissions, so not the postponement
Yeah,
of rates policy.
Staff.
So just retains, so take out that whole top part and just retains the rates remission policy.
Routine.
Yeah, that's the other.
Sorry.
It is that we're only talking about the financial, but this is of course your decision. Are we only talking about the extreme financial hardship parts?
Yes.
Yes.
That's the only part we're talking about. All of the other remission related sport is a remission.
Extreme financial hardship.
So do we want to say amends the financial hardship
rates
aspect in the rates remission policy to require council approval?
So agrees to retain the rates remission policy.
As notified.
And then we could go with the amendment that extreme financial hardship applications must come to council.
Marks.
Yeah.
Okay.
So does that cover remission and postponement?
No.
Only remission for extreme financial hardship is a separate section in the plan, in the policy.
So X agrees to retain the rates remission policy with the amendment that extreme financial hardship applications must come to council
Or decision.
for a decision.
This doesn't need to go on the resolution, but would it be useful for when we get a quiet moment, to have a conversation with you all around, if you want any criteria, or you're just happy to leave it open and you guys just decide case by case.
I think it probably needs to be on a case by case, given that it's only going to be for extreme and unusual situations, and that perhaps some unintended outcomes could come from.
Well, criteria for somebody comes in who's totally working, but completely outside the criteria. Right.
Right.
Peter, the last time we talked about this, you said you had experience with councils where they don't have the extreme.
A lot of councils don't have financial hardship as a policy. So that you do, it's commendable, but councils, there are councils out there that won't consider that because they don't have it in their policy. Which means they go for postponement and those other options.
Right, I think I'd argue,
I mean, the argument that we would use if we had an application, we would say that if you meet the criteria for a postponement, we must apply it. It's almost you take your chance with council.
that postponement comes first.
Me that, and that conversation, which is quite right, is that there was some sort of general criteria that was within that policy that we felt the gentleman met, so we probably need to say that it must come to council for decision, and there is discretion for council. So we can go away and look at the wording, but we want to say, Wayne, must come to council for decision and council has discretion, or something like that, so that you don't feel that every application, so there's only one, but if there's 50 applications that you feel your hands are bound, you know, it makes the general, because we have to have an application criteria on our website for people to be able to apply to you. So this case, he took everything. So if we have something there that while they might meet the criteria for consideration, you have the discretion still to decide.
Yeah, sorry, Wayne, I think you can take out decision to be decided, a decision on a case by case basis.
Another thing, if it comes from the community, that probably wouldn't have to chair the community board to actually have a look over it first. Because we had only one we had the 20 years of involved was from a sheriff who was in jail and couldn't afford to pay for the rates on his 2 sections he bought because he couldn't shear sheep. And the only reason he was in jail was because he was in jail. And it's all sell one of his sections to pay for the rates, and we said no, and he's still got a section.
Right, Wayne.
Is somebody happy to?
It's basis, not business.
Oh, whoops.
Yeah.
Is somebody happy to?
Now, can I just agree to retain the rates policy as notified? Because that's what it was part of the LTP. So it's not about retaining the policy, but it's as notified. With that amendment, is that?
That's fine. Yep.
Yeah.
With the amendment that extreme financial hardship applications must come to council for a decision on a case by case basis.
Yep.
Somebody happy to move that? Thank you, Neil. Cheryl. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried.
I must leave you all. Have a great day.
Thank you.
I've got a management meeting in Ramsey. I might need it. Yeah.
Okay, when you're
Right,
there.
there was one about deciding the income received from mining agreements is recognised in the budget, so I feel like we've covered that. Yeah.
So the next one is, for the first time, you have seen we've announced the full draft plan. So the items that you haven't seen in that before is essentially the front end that has a bit from Tamer and Peter, has the activity summaries that is still very much in draft. That can be amended all this week. So we do have that final resolution around the mayor and the CE having discretion to make amendments. We need to make some amendments based on the decisions that you've made today, and reflect those in that front end, and Tamer and Peter may wish to revisit the front bit on reflection of decisions. But at this stage, really the opportunity, very late in the day, if there is any feedback, but again, if it's too long in the day, you can feed that back through to Tamer, and we can reflect that. So we would just need that feedback at the absolute latest by lunchtime on Friday.
I would have said
Ready for Monday.
I would have said we've already provided that feedback with what we've done, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
So I think you've actually, we've done it. And what you're really saying is anything else you've forgotten about? And the answer is no. Therefore, it's covered by the last one, which is the mayor and CE So it should be minor. If it's not minor, then it becomes major and audit probably get involved, so
I'll hear about it.
you'll hear about it.
Or if, if some of those activity summaries just like what we did and that kind of stuff, but, you know, the GMs have been over
It
those,
was
so, yeah.
one comment I made on those activity summaries in the little boxes. There was an acronym in one of them, and I didn't think we should have an
Acronyms.
Yeah. And I'm pretty sure let me, here.
I don't understand.
Page 40. Page 49.
That's true.
Um,
Sound like student voice.
Page 49, and it's alignment to outcomes, and it says it's the purple box, and at the bottom, the last sentence, it says MTFJ and regional partnerships. But who's going to know what that is?
So we can.
No one. So that was, yeah, just one.
So that's like sanity check for acronyms, and no one's gonna know what they mean.
Yeah.
We'll leave them there and see if anybody does read it.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I read it.
Well done, Sally. Because I missed it.
I agree with Sally.
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
No, that was Stu. Sure, that was Stu.
Kelly, that was, done by our graphic designer who sits left. I'll need to talk to Paula about who can access that system, who can that chain. It is, that's a minor edit that we can work on in the next couple of weeks. We'll just look at it on it, about a change in appearance, so we'll, figure that one out. If you don't see it immediately, just.
No, that's fine. That's all good.
It's outside of Word.
But I think people get quite annoyed when they're reading, because you know, you could sit there for 5 minutes trying to figure out.
Figure it out. Yes.
I want to know, yeah, you see it.
Yeah.
It could be a variety of things. You put your imagination back on it. Agrees to the Mayor and Chief Executive approving any minor editorial changes and changes required as a result of these deliberations, so not these deliberations, of the above resolutions. The draft 25 to 34 long-term plan ahead of the final audit commencing.
Ready to move?
Thank you. I'm happy to second. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Right.
That'd be the last one, you're running out of letters and you hit the alphabet.
Do we need to put in a Z? Just-
Yeah.
Is there a Z down the table there? You look like there's.
Is it a Z?
Discussing for audit purposes, because they do audit that front end, the activity summaries against the budgets. Whether we just simply need to say, that you noted the remaining content of the draft package. We said that we had provided the feedback anyway.
Go on then, bang it in.
Bang it in, and then we're covered.
Especially if it covers off audit.
Notes everything else.
Yeah.
Or notes anything audit might bring up.
Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily agree with them, but.
Yeah.
See that?
I don't know if I've ever seen it.
So what are we actually saying? This resolution is saying that we are now happy with the document. There's nothing you want to add and you're authorising us to release it to audit for.
Approves the long-term plan 2025 to 34 and directs the CE to submit to audit.
Well, we can't approve it until it's, well, yeah, approve the draft for submission to audit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what we should do.
Yeah.
Or at least all.
Right? Happy?
We're happy.
And just picking it up, that then means that this will come back to us after audit for adoption.
Yep.
At the June meeting dated
20 something.
We're hoping for the 25th, then May.
What do you mean you're hoping for the 25th? There's no more meeting, there's no more meetings in June. What are you talking about?
I'm happy to move Z.
Yeah.
Neil's happy to second it. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. AA?
It's whether you wish to discuss the rating examples and set the proportion of fixed charges versus capital or land value charges today. Since it has been a relatively long day, I'm just wondering whether it's worth tacking it on to the end of the council meeting next week. Next week? Yeah, next week. 28th. To talk, because you have to decide.
I think it's worthwhile putting it on there because I think we do need to have a discussion around, do we meet that 30% cap requirement and all of those.
I can show you the figures if you're interested in that, and then it's talking about, okay, because currently if you just fit under the cap, it's like 29.6, so it's very close. Is it possible, Wayne, that we can I get this up?
But I'm not sure, I mean, it has been a long day. We've got some meetings to go to already. I just wonder if that is a conversation for the next meeting, because this is actually quite a heavy conversation to have this bit here.
Yeah, so can you go back to, because I think that that's going to be an important thing for the media, is that we highlight that percentage point that we have reached at the end of today's deliberations. And then, so 12.46% is the average rates rise for this long-term plan, recognising that there are overs and unders for that, and probably the next part does need to come back for next week.
And you're currently sitting at 29.84 under your 30% cap. So
it's great.
Federated Farmers will be happy.
Like, I think this is the thing that you need to think about for next week is, given that a large chunk of your rating disappears in 2 years' time, that 29.84 becomes 39.84 21. Do you want to start a program of reducing that now so it's not as big a hit in year one of the next LTP?
So that it doesn't become 60 cents to $2.40.
Exactly. So,
And I think we know.
I think, given that this is quite complicated, not that you wouldn't understand it, but it's a late in the day and it needs some full attention, I think.
It's going to have to work
Through that previously, and we know that this is coming.
Yeah.
And yes, I think it would be worthwhile setting time aside in next week's meeting to go through it to see if we want to learn from the lessons that we took this morning and start making those adjustments.
And this was an issue that you were going to undertake forward to our local government in New Zealand.
Yes, yeah. That
I
was
think it's an issue.
one of the things that we've been discussing.
just have to work hard and get the plate to the way.
So they will know you're going to be out today.
No, today, perfect. Noting that we've done a lot of heavy lifting today. Thank you very much. Thank you to everybody here. Thank you to the team. And of course, our appreciation to the record number of submitters that let us hear their thoughts. There will, of course, be some very happy people, including an OFA today, and then there will be some people in some of our smaller communities who will be disappointed with the decisions that we have made, and we will carry that and acknowledge that we, I think, have made the best decisions that we can for the ratepayers and residents of today, but also those ones into the future. And I think that we have struck the right balance between the nice to haves and the must haves and the core business that doesn't involve kicking multiple cans down multiple roads to the next generation, which has plagued local government for some time, I think. So thank you for your decisions today. Some of them were easy and some of them were not very easy. So I really appreciate your time and all those people watching online as well. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Whakatakata hau ki te uru, whakatakata hau ki te tonga, ke mā kina ki uta, ke mā taratara ki tai. E hi ati ana te ata kura, e tio, e hoka, e hauhu, e hei mōhia. Two more meetings to go to.
Yeah. We'll see you all next week for 28.
Wednesday week, tomorrow week.
Well done, that was a very good day.